Hi friends, if you like watching my videos, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, put a like, and do not forget to click on the bell. Enjoy watching! The young man called a girl named Adriana, after which the girl found herself in his arms. The playful love of a god is sweet, the only destiny prepared for the two of them, prickly as a needle. A notification of a new message appeared. The girl wondered who the message was from. She read the acceptance message and then jumped out of bed, jumping and screaming with joy. She realized that she wasn't dreaming. She had been accepted into the company she wanted. With tears in her eyes, she looked at the phone, declaring that she needed to tell everyone the news. She called the guys on the phone and informed them that she had been accepted for the job she wanted, then agreed to meet with them and thanked them. She had already lost count of how many times she had submitted her resume for her dream job. She went to a lot of interviews. She's only 22 years old. Yes, she has her whole life ahead of her. Standing in front of a crosswalk, she noticed a guy who was very handsome. She noted that he looks exactly like Daniel from the novel. She thinks that it is not a sin to fall in love with such a man at first sight. She wondered where he was looking. The car was rushing straight at the girl. Lying on the pavement, covered in blood, she thought about how much everything hurt. Someone was yelling that there had been an accident and asking for an ambulance. The girl wondered if this was her end. Someone continued yelling that it was too late and the girl had lost a lot of blood. That's how she died, after being hit by a car. When the girl opened her eyes, she saw the faces of 3 maids. They called her Princess Clara. The black-haired maid noted that the girl looked beautiful today. The blonde maid noted that she was more beautiful than ever before. The girl didn't realize who it was. Looking at herself, she saw the dress and wondered when she had worn something like that, and hadn't she been hit by a car? The girl raised her hand, saying she wanted to look in the mirror. The maids asked to wait 1 minute and placed a full-length mirror in front of the girl. The girl looked carefully at the face. Beautiful appearance, silver hair, purple eyes. The blonde maid checked with the girl, wondering if there was something she didn't like. The girl recognized the face and wondered why she looked like Clara from that novel. The girl rushed to the window and opened it. She mentally asked only not to tell her. Then she realized that there was definitely no doubt about it now, and she had entered the world of that novel. The girl grabbed her hair, not understanding why she had been reincarnated in the novel. What about her work, her life, and why she had become Clara? The blonde maid alerted the princess that His Majesty Bastion would be arriving soon, and she needed to hurry. Princess Clara's reaction to the words about Bastion elicited questioning looks from the 3 maids. The girl couldn't believe it. One of the standing bodies in the crowd of girls noted sadly that the tyrant was returning. Another girl asked her to be quiet, saying that isn't His Majesty Bastion, the great king of all time, then told the other girl not to stand on a pillar, but to clap her hands. Someone loudly announced that His Majesty had arrived. Also, the crowd shouted that long live the kingdom of Verona. Long live the king, and long life to His Majesty Bastion. Prosperity to the kingdom of Verona. Bastion rode on a horse, followed by a horse with a bound man. A girl in the crowd said that since His Majesty had returned, it meant that hard times were coming again, and she wondered who the man behind him was. The other girl answered her that she believed His Majesty had brought a defeated soldier with him. Bastion began to climb the stairs where the princess stood. Once up, he stood directly in front of the girl and noted that it had been a long time since they had seen Clara. The girl responded with His Majesty of assent. Bastion noted that it was obvious, even from a distance, that she'd been crying, and he asked if she really hated him that much. Clara replied that she didn't, and thought mentally about how she could not cry in her situation. After all, he would soon kill Clara on that guillotine. Clara will be sentenced to execution and all because of that guy he brought with him tied up. Bastion asked Clara if something was wrong. Clara turned away and said that no. She put her hand over her heart and began to ask him to calm down. Clara would die because of falling in love with Prince Daniel. Someone shouted that before the sentence was carried out, he was declaring the crime of Clara Velasco traitorous. He continued that Clara Velasco betrayed His Majesty Bastion and helped their enemy escape. This sin can only be atoned for by death. The girl didn't believe what was happening. She believes it was a dream. She was just reading too much. If she could concentrate, she would wake up. The people then shouted for her to be killed. The girl mentally stated that she wasn't Clara. She was just a normal reader, and she mentally asked that this please be a dream. She wanted to wake up. Just then, the girl abruptly got up from the bed, trying to catch her breath. Looking around, she didn't realize where she was. Pulling her head up, she realized that it wasn't a dream. She really was now living in a novel. She had also become Clara. She thinks this is a nightmare. For how is she supposed to survive here? And this place is even worse than the real world. A maid appeared in the room, noting that the mistress was awake and wished her a good morning. The blonde maid clarified with the girl if she would visit Prince Daniel first as always. The girl didn't understand at first why she would, and then remembered yesterday. Bastion called loudly for Clara and asked her to wake up. The girl turned to His Majesty, who asked her why she was blushing so much. What was she even thinking there? Bastion stated that she could consider Prince Daniel an honoured guest of their country anyway, so he was leaving all the hospitality up to her. Clara clarified about him leaving it on her. Bastion checked with the girl, wondering if she couldn't handle it. Clara faltered. She remembered everything now. The reason Clara had fallen in love with Daniel in the first place was because it was Bastion who had brought the two of them together in the first place. She realized that in order to survive, she needed to distance herself from Daniel and become closer with Bastion. She re-engaged in conversation with Bastion, realizing that she needed to answer him. The girl told him confidently that she would do everything. Bastion asked if she was sure she could do it. Clara replied that yes, she could leave Daniel to her. Bastion asked again, to which Clara mentally noted that he had asked her, so what was his reaction? She remembered that the real Clara was afraid of Bastion. His Majesty noted that the girl was so confident, and she hoped she could pull it off, and he would watch her do it. Clara wondered if she should have refused, but it was too late to change anything. The guards greeted the princess loudly. Daniel's room and Clara's room were next to each other. The girl didn't understand what was wrong with her. She didn't understand why they had to put him in the next room. Bastion said that he was their special guest, so the attitude should be special, and so you wouldn't have to go far. Even though he was her brother, it was too mean, although she had no one else to rely on but Bastion. Clara realized that she needed to pull herself together. As she approached Daniel's room, Clara asked the guards if she could enter, to which the guards answered positively. They opened the doors in front of the girl to the rooms. Once inside, Clara wondered why it was so empty. Wasn't Daniel their special guest? Just then, a question rang out, wondering who had entered the room. Daniel was lying tied up on the bed. The girl looked at him, not understanding why he was tied up. She shared that she was Clara Velasco. This is when Daniel realized she was a princess, and after apologizing to her, he clarified if she could help him untie it. He shared that the guards refused to help, so he has been in this position since last night. He said he needed the girl's help. He was asking for it. Clara looked at him, not knowing what to do. She had promised not to go near him, but she couldn't just leave him like that. Clara asked him if he was in pain. Daniel replied that he'd been hurt when he'd been caught, but no one had ever brought him the right medicine. He noted that he was in a little bit of pain. Clara mentally urged herself to get a grip and turned away from him and asked him to wait. She would call the guards. The guards removed the ropes from Daniel. Clara turned to the maids to call for a doctor. However, the maids apologized, as it would be difficult to do so. The girl asked indignantly why, to which the maid replied that it was King Bastion's order. The royal doctor was only for members of the royal family. She replied loudly that Bastion just didn't want to treat Daniel. The maid replied to Her Highness that no way, in return the king gave her this. The maid then handed Clara a box of medicine. Clara asked indignantly, what was this nonsense? It would have been better if they had just called a doctor. The maids bowed and apologized. Clara returned to Daniel's room with the box in question. She told the maids that she would take care of it and they could go. Clara approached Daniel and apologized, telling him that it looked like she would have to take over his treatment. Daniel thanked her for her efforts. Placing the first aid kit on the bed, Clara checked with him to see where he was hurting. Daniel unbuttoned his shirt and pointed out where it hurt. Clara was dumbfounded by the sight. Daniel finally took off his shirt and added that there were enough scratches on his back as well. The girl stood turned away, her back to her, to which Daniel called out to her questioningly. The girl mentally realized that this was too dangerous. If this continued, she would definitely be executed. Clara didn't understand what to do. She thought she could control herself, but nothing was working. Her heart was beating so hard. If this kept up, she would end up like the real Clara. Daniel touched her and called out to her. He reminded her of the treatment. Turning around, the girl tripped over her own dress and started to fall. But Daniel immediately caught her and asked if she was okay. Clara replied that she was, but realized it was too close. Daniel felt pain, and Clara immediately remembered his wounds. Looking at him, she noted that he looked so pale, and then she wondered if she could help him through the pain. Clara immediately rushed to the first aid kit, saying that she would start with decontamination. The girl asked him to sit down, to which the young man thanked her for her help. Clara asked him if he was in a lot of pain. Daniel replied that it was fine and that he could take it. The girl mentally noted where it was good. She had to do her best. Rubbing his wound, she asked him to be patient for a while. Clara found herself thinking that she shouldn't have taken on his treatment after all, since he was making such heavy noises. After a moment, however, Clara urged herself to pull herself together, for he was a special patient. Aloud, the girl alerted that the bleeding had already stopped. Daniel shared that he had been awake all the time and had been without sleep for a long time, so he didn't feel very good and apologized to her. The girl replied that she would finish up quickly now, but the next moment, Clara hurt Daniel a lot while treating the wounds and apologized. She just wanted to be quick. Daniel replied that everything was fine. Daniel went to bed and Clara left his room. Standing with her back to her, she summed up that she was not going to be a doctor. A maid appeared, and addressing Her Highness, informed her that King Bastion was calling her to his room. Clara did not understand why. If she remembered correctly, the relationship between Clara and Bastion was not very good, so why would he want to meet her? The maid stopped at the door and told Clara it was this way. The girl remembered that this is where that purple parlour of Aquila Castle was. His Highness was notified that Princess Clara had arrived, to which the king replied to have the girl called. Clara entered the room and bowed, greeting His Majesty. Bastion asked the girl why she was standing there so she could sit down. Clara noted that he was so strange. Bastion asked the girl how Danielle was doing. The girl replied that she had finished the treatment and he was asleep. Bastion replied that it was glorious and shared that this decontaminator was very strong, so he must have been in a hell of a lot of pain. Clara wondered if it was on purpose, if her brother wasn't really such a tyrant to make a sick person feel even more pain. How petty Bastion was. Clara asked His Majesty if he could send a healer to Daniel. The king asked why he would do that. Clara replied that she didn't know what to do in case he got worse. Bastion smirked and asked why he cared. The girl sincerely didn't understand what was wrong with him, why he was doing this to her. If this continued, the girl would die, not because of Daniel, but because of Bastion. She wondered what she should do. Clara asked His Highness to still consider her words. After all, they had better take care of him until they could get him back to the Empire. Bastion clarified about the return, after which he abruptly put his hand on the table and rose from his seat. She stated that he wasn't actually going to return it. Clara wondered if her brother had stolen it for a special purpose, to which Bastion replied that he hadn't thought about it. The girl clarified that if Daniel escaped to his homeland on his own. Bastion answered that he would not be able to escape without help. Then he asked his sister if she was already going to help him, if she wanted to let him out. Clara thought about how tired she was of this. The girl answered her brother that it just seemed like a reasonable idea. But since the king was not going to let him go, the matter was over. Bastion asked if that was it. Clara reminded His Majesty that the Emperor would be awake very soon. Bastion was puzzled and asked his sister why she thought that. Clara reminded him that he was sick, but not dead, and according to her books, he would wake up in a year. Clara pointed out that even though it was a lie, according to the novel, the Emperor would wake up in 6 months. She added aloud that the Emperor would definitely start looking for Prince Daniel, and that wasn't enough to treat him as an honoured guest. Bastion sadly asked if the old man could really wake up. Clara said yes, and then they could ask for land or something as ransom. The Emperor has a soft spot for Prince Daniel, so would agree. Bastion smirked and remarked that it was such a good idea. The girl mentally noted that now the protagonist would live as a prisoner, but she realized that she didn't care, because the main thing was that she would be alive and well next to Bastion. Bastion noticed something and shared that he might have eaten something wrong, but it was as if his sister had become a different person. Clara wondered if she was acting so strangely, or if it was because of her behavior on the first day. The girl wondered where she had made a mistake, but still urged herself to pull herself together. Clara replied to Bastion that she just didn't want to live like she used to anymore. He himself knows what her place in the palace is. The girl realized that it wasn't just that Clara was unhappy because of her relationship with her tyrant brother. Clara answered Bastion that it might be too late, but she really wants to change, at least to try. After her words, the girl smiled sweetly. This shocked her brother, who noted that the girl smiled. To her offer he agreed, saying that she could treat him well. The girl bowed and thanked Bastion. The first wish of Clara was fulfilled. The girl walked excitedly down the corridor, happy at how well everything had worked out. She'd been so worried, and Bastion was more cooperative than she'd thought. She was left to look after Daniel for these 6 months. Clara noticed that the maids didn't even greet her. One of the maids turned to the other, asking what to do since they didn't say hello. The other one replied that Clara wouldn't do anything anyway, because she didn't even look like a princess. So why should they respect her? And all because Clara is the maid's daughter. As she approached the room, the girl wondered if it was right to ignore their conversation. Sure, she knew Clara wasn't pure blood, but still such an attitude. They should apologize. The girl remembered the other people talking about how she was really a princess. She was ashamed of herself. It was obvious that she was from the lower class. People talked about how it was a shame that the rest of the royal family had died, and King Bastion had only managed to save this one. Although if she had died, no one would have cared. Clara stated that she wasn't going to live like this anymore and turn a blind eye. She needed to survive, and now she was Clara. But she immediately exhaled, noting that she had some urgent business to take care of. Clara knocked on the door and entered the prince's room. The girl thought he seemed to be feeling better, though he was still as pale as ever. Clara asked him how he was feeling. Daniel replied that he was a little bored being in the room all the time. He also shared that a doctor stopped by, and he clarified if it was at Clara's request. The girl replied that it was, to which the prince thanked her for taking off the ropes. Clara replied that it was a self-evident gesture in such a situation. Daniel turned to the princess, saying he would like to go outside, and asked if it was impossible. Clara looked at him and did not understand why it was so bright if he had a halo over his head. Daniel came closer to the girl and called out to her. Clara noticed that he was close now. Daniel added that although he couldn't look out the windows because they were too high, someday he'd like to look out the flowering garden with the princess together. Clara was shocked at what that even meant. Daniel pointed out that if the girl didn't mind taking a walk together, Clara was about to agree, but immediately hesitated and said, "No, stop, you can't." Daniel smiled sweetly, realizing it hadn't worked. Clara wondered where he was going already. Continuing to smile, Daniel suggested she take him to see the king. The girl was dumbfounded and wondered if the prince had always had such a temper. While outside, Clara thought about how she was almost confused when she saw the smile on Daniel's face. She needs to get a grip on her emotions. After all, they will be seeing each other often. It was then that Clara noticed the maid who had spoken unflatteringly about her. The maid also noticed the princess and turned away from her. Clara walked swiftly towards her, noting that the maid was again pretending not to see the princess. The girl shouted at her to stop. Clara came closer and asked if she was the Duchess of Alba's maid, to which she replied in the affirmative. Clara clarified why the maid was ignoring her. The maid clarified about the ignoring. Clara remarked back that she had ignored her just now. The maid replied that she didn't even know, but after some time bowed to her, saying that she was glad to meet the princess, but she had so much work to do and asked if she could go. Clara clarified if she was calling it a greeting. Somebody asked Clara and the maid what was going on. The maid was happy and ran to her mistress. She bowed to the princess and greeted her, then asked if she had any problems with her maid. Clara learned that the same candidate for the role of the future queen was the Duchess Martina Alba. Martina asked Clara what was wrong with her maid. The princess replied that the maid ignored her and didn't greet her. Martina smirked, and the maid actively shook her head. The Duchess replied to the princess that her maid was quite well bred, and it was unlikely she would have done it on purpose. Clara clarified whether Martine thought the princess would have lied. Martine was a rather overbearing and self-serving person in the affair, and openly ignored Clara. Martina asked her maid if it was true that she had ignored the princess. The maid nervously replied that no, she was just looking at the floor as she walked, so she hadn't seen her. The Duchess remarked that she thought it was understandable, and besides, she was on her way to an urgent meeting right now, so she thought they could close their eyes on this situation, quickly. Martine herself was thinking about how much she was pissed off and would have to tell the king about the girl, that whiny little bug. Clara stated that she thought the meeting could wait. It had been a while since they had spoken to the princess after all. Martine turned angrily to the princess, shouting for her to say what she wanted from her so the Duchess could go. Clara pointed her finger at the maid, telling her to punish her for ignoring her presence. Martina was dumbfounded and clarified if the princess thought it was too much to punish the maid for such an oversight. Clara clarified about the words about the oversight. She also recalled the Duchess giving a good slap to the woman who had spilled water on her dress. Clara said for the Duchess to do the same for her maid, ignoring the princess and lying. The maid wanted to object, but didn't have time to finish as she received a powerful slap from Martina's sweat. The maid knelt down, addressing her mistress. Duchess Alba remarked that it seems her maid had really misbehaved this time. She also clarified to the princess if she was satisfied or if she should hit the maid again. There were marks running down the maid's face. She asked Madame to stop and stated that she would not do it again. Martina looked at the princess, noting that she had such a sad face. She could only express herself in words, but in life she wouldn't hurt a mosquito, so what was the point of her worrying about this little thing? Clara came closer to them and said that it was not enough. She was still waiting for her apology. Clara asked the maid to think for herself, for if she had done that to the king, what would he have done in the princess's place? Clara took the maid by the chin and, turning her around, suggested that the king would have ordered the maid's useless eyes to be cut out. The Duchess and her maid were horrified at what they heard. Martine asked indignantly why the girl was trying to bring the king into this. The Duchess told the princess not to say something like that unless she meant it. Clara clarified that if that was what she meant, after all they were brother and sister, and therefore similar. Clara also inquired that if they wanted to, she would do it right now. The maid was on all fours, begging her mistress not to do that. Clara started to shout indignantly that she hadn't realized that she should apologize to the princess, not to her mistress, because Clara was the princess. The maid immediately started apologizing to the princess for not greeting her. She began to beg for forgiveness. She had committed a huge sin. The Duchess of Alba turned to the princess. Clara said to continue. She would say when enough was enough, for there always comes a time to pay for one's mistakes. Martina slapped her maid, and at one point Clara said that was enough. The maid lay on the ground and kept apologizing to the princess. Clara noted that she had been in such a lousy mood, but now it was much better, and she hoped the maid would learn her lesson and be polite from now on. As she left, Clara told the Duchess to see you later. The Duchess was angry. She ordered her maid lying on the ground to get up. Martina herself thought about what the hell this is all about. How dare the princess? After all, Martina is a duchess, and she will show her her place. As she left, Duchess Alba thought about killing the princess and realized that it was the perfect solution. The maid continued to lie on the ground, sobbing and calling for her mistress. Martine mentally stated that they would see about it and mentally urged the princess to be careful, for she was bound to embarrass her in front of everyone. Already finding herself alone, Clara stopped. She thought that she would feel better, but she felt uncomfortable, and the maid must have been in a lot of pain. However, it was the only option. Clara can't feel safe if no one is on her side, so she has to. She didn't understand why she felt this way. Being a minor character was very lonely. Tears appeared in Clara's eyes. She didn't understand why. She can't. She wants to be happy. Suddenly, Someone asked the girl what was wrong. It was Bastion. Clara turned away from her brother, wiping her eyes, and answered that it was nothing. Afterwards, she noted that the king had apparently gone for a walk. Bastion looked at his sister carefully and remembered her words about wanting to change before it was too late. The king confirmed what she said about the walk and asked if she had seen the prince. Clara replied that yes, she had, and shared that Prince Daniel had asked for permission to go out. These words made Bastion angry, and he asked who the prince thought he was, if they were his servants. The king decided to teach him a lesson. Clara thought that her brother had told her to treat him as an important guest, but it was too much. The girl told Bastion that she understood and would tell the prince. Bastion ordered the girl to behave rudely to the prince, to show him his place. Clara agreed, but mentally thought about the fact that it was so difficult with His Majesty. The clash with the Duchess, the reproaches from her brother the king, it was so hard for her to be a princess. The maids bowed to the princess and the king. Clara thought about the fact that next to Bastion, no one would ignore her. The king interrupted the silence and asked the girl if she was going to the banquet in honor of the victory. Clara answered that yes, this time she would attend. Bastion remarked that it was the right decision. Clara decided to ask if perhaps the king wanted to go as her partner, but Bastion didn't understand her right away, to which the girl apologized, saying that apparently her brother didn't like the idea. Bastion asked her to wait and asked if he had heard everything correctly, and if his sister was not sick. She was acting strange. Bastion wondered if something had happened while he was gone. As the boys walked around, Bastion watched his sister carefully, thinking about why his sister was trying to get close to him. Clara, meanwhile, wondered if she had gone overboard. It was understandable, however, since the real Clara was afraid of Bastion, so they were not close and avoided each other. Clara replied to her brother that she was fine, but in general, on the contrary, her brother seemed very tired and clarified that maybe he hadn't gotten enough sleep. Bastion replied that yes, after the war he had trouble sleeping. Clara remembered that in the story Bastion had insomnia all the time, and maybe that was why he was always so evil. Clara suddenly asked His Highness about daytime sleep. Bastion reminded her that he had said he had trouble sleeping. Clara wanted to add something else, but Bastion asked her if she hadn't heard. He had insomnia. The girl grabbed his arm and told him to just walk with her to the bench. Setting him down on the bench, Clara suggested he try it now. It was a safe place and there was no war here. Bastion asked her how she thought he was supposed to sleep here, since he didn't even have a pillow. After a moment, Bastion asked his sister puzzledly what she was doing. The girl put his head in her lap and asked if it was comfortable. Bastion covered his eyes and replied that it was fine, and then told the girl to sing him a lullaby. The girl was surprised, and the king said it was to calm him down. Clara thought about it, realizing that she had been stepped on by a bear in her past life. But if it could help Bastion in any way. Clara began to sing a lullaby, and wondered for a moment how long it would take her to sing. When she stopped singing and looked at Bastion, she asked him aloud if he was asleep. Clara realized that he was fast asleep, and he looks so cute when he sleeps. The cruelest tyrant in this novel, the man who took hundreds of lives, her brother Bastion. The girl didn't understand why he killed all his brothers and left only Clara alive. Mentally, she turned to His Highness, telling him that the Clara he knew was gone. She asked him to please help her change and urged him to forget the past and finally accept each other. The very next day, Clara stood in front of the prince's room and thought about how yesterday had indeed been a difficult day. A meeting with the prince and her brother, an argument with the duchess. Clara decided that from this day on, she needed to always be calm and centered. In just half a year, Emperor Nerja will wake up, and after waking up, he will definitely help the prince. Even Bastion can't ignore the emperor, which means Daniel will return to his homeland safe and sound. All she has to do is hang on. Clara entered the prince's room informing him that she had brought the book he had asked for. In the room, she found the prince sleeping on the bed and walked over to him. She was indignant as to why he was so handsome. The girl now realized why poor Clara had helped him escape. The girl said all this aloud, and the prince heard it all. He got up immediately from the bed, saying that who knew that the princess herself would pay him such a compliment. Clara was indignant and asked him why he didn't say he was awake. The girl herself at this point wondered mentally what she should do. He had heard everything. Daniel replied that he had been awakened by the creak of the door, and now he was sleeping so much, there was nothing to do. He summarized that he should probably keep pretending to be asleep. Clara was mentally freaking out, wondering if the prince had heard absolutely everything. The prince himself asked the princess what he hoped he hadn't heard that he shouldn't have. Clara clutched her head, saying that it was the end, and she was lost. She didn't understand how she could look the prince in the eyes now. But out loud, the girl asked the prince not to worry about it. She took the book, saying that here it is, the one he asked Clara for last time. She stated that she would please leave it here and leave him. Suddenly, Daniel turned to the princess and asked her why she was covering her face. Clara mentally replied that after such a disgrace, she did not want him to see her at all. The prince asked if she was leaving already. He was sorry. She was the only one he could talk to. Danielle asked if they could talk about something before she left. Clara responded by inquiring about what. The prince suggested talking about the empire, for example. Clara moved closer to the prince's bed and placed the book next to him and apologized, saying that there was no news from the Nurk Empire. The prince suddenly clarified about Verona. Daniel reminded her that she'd said he was the guest of honor, but weren't there receptions for honored guests? Clara remembered that a banquet in honor of the victory would be held very soon. She wondered if the prince was asking her to take him with her. Daniel grimaced and asked if it would be impossible. Clara turned away from him, confirming his question, and adding that she had already said it was the king's order, hadn't she? The prince grinned and noted that the girl was so stubborn. Clara apologized and replied that there was nothing she could do about it. In her mind, she thought that she should get out of here as soon as possible. The prince replied that everything was fine, and the main thing was not to give up. Clara didn't understand what he was talking about, but the prince added that he had said he wanted to take a walk with the girl one day. He stated that he would keep asking her to do that until he could, and he hoped that the girl wouldn't mind. Clara replied that she didn't mind. Mentally, the girl noted that she understood that he needed some freedom, but she couldn't go out for a walk with the prince of their feuding country. Daniel stated that he was happy then, and clarified if he could be a little more assertive now. Clara thought about what she'd told him about the banquet celebrating their victory, and wondered how he could smile so easily while looking into her eyes. Daniel said that from now on he would ask her to go for a walk with him every day. After a moment, he asked if he could always be with her. Clara stated no, he couldn't. Clara said that he frightened her too much with his suggestions, and she would rather walk. The prince jumped up from his seat and turned to the princess. Clara told him that whatever he said. The prince bowed and thanked her for the book, and added that he really enjoyed every time she came. Daniel asked her to come tomorrow too, and they would talk to him some more. Clara thought about how a prince could bow his head so easily to someone. Clara replied aloud to the prince that it was good, and said goodbye until their next meeting. The girl did not understand what she should do. Clara gradually brought books to the prince. One day the girl informed him that she had to go, because she had to prepare herself properly. The prince noted that so it was today, and after all he still wanted to be with the girl a little longer. He was sorry, but he accepted it, and asked the girl to tell him then tomorrow how the banquet went. He wished the girl a good time. Clara smilingly thanked the prince. The maids noted that the lady seemed to be in a good mood, and she had been waiting for this banquet for a long time. Clara mentally noted that she was really getting used to the place, and she had a good relationship with the prince. Even though he's the main character in her favourite novel, there's still a lot she doesn't know about him, and since she happens to be living in the novel now, she hopes she can find out more about him. She wondered what he would look like when she saw the main character. One of the maids asked Clara how she liked that yellow dress. The girl replied that it was beautiful. Then another maid appeared and declared that Mistress should wear this dress. The first maid said that the dress did not suit Mistress's style. The second maid called it nonsense, because the dress is gorgeous and she should definitely wear it. The second maid showed again this dress, shouting that Mistress should definitely choose it. The first maid clarified why she was shouting in front of her mistress. Clara noted that the second maid's name was Arantxa, one of the older maids, with a rather firm temper. Arantxa asked the first maid not to interfere. Clara replied to the girls that any would do for her. The princess noticed the slightly sad face of the first maid and called her silly. What a distraught face she had. Clara just didn't want Arantxa to be mad at her later. Clara pointed out that it was certainly not what she normally wore, but it should go well with Clara's looks. The maid stated that any outfit would suit the princess. Clara noted that it was too revealing. The maid smilingly stated that the girl was the most beautiful in all of Verona. Clara recalled that the maid had said that the dress was not the princess's style. Clara remembered that in the novel, the maid Sarah had said that she was very honest and never lied, and it was worth it to have someone like that in the palace. Clara took Sarah's face in her hands and said that she liked the maid's honesty so much. Clara approached Bastion's room. The butler beside her informed her that His Majesty was still preparing, and that he would wait here in the hallway. Clara wondered why her brother had summoned her before the banquet. She wondered if he might have agreed to accompany her. Clara immediately began to deny it because it was impossible. Her brother was not that kind of person. But she wondered what then. He wouldn't have called her for nothing. Then she remembered Martine. Perhaps he had called her because of their quarrel. The butler alerted the girl that she could enter. Clara appeared in her brother's room and greeted His Majesty. Bastion noted that here was the girl, then awkwardly clarified that she had sort of offered to be her date to the banquet. Clara was surprised, at which Bastion asked what that expression was on her face. The girl wondered if it wasn't because of Martina, and he really wanted to accompany her. Clara thanked His Majesty, to which he replied that it was all right. He did not want the girl to appear there alone. The butler came and informed His Highness that the Duchess of Alba was asking to come in. Bastion didn't understand why she was here and told him to call her. Clara thought that apparently Bastion still did not know what had happened between the princess and Martina, if she could pretend. Martina appeared, noting that she seemed to be interrupting. Her appearance startled Bastion and Clara. They were wearing the same dress. The question arose as to how that could have happened. Martina noted that the dress was the latest trend of the season, and such an interesting coincidence. Bastion pointed out to Clara that that was the problem, and asked his sister how that had happened. Clara didn't know what to answer. She remembered how Arantxa had insisted on that dress. Clara wondered if it was really about Arantxa. She was her maid. Why would she? Martina asked the princess not to worry. After all, what's wrong with loving fashion? The Duchess added that let their dresses be the same, but not them. It could be the highlight of the evening. Bastion glanced at his sister and wondered if she really wasn't going to change him. Clara asked why, to which Bastion wondered if he needed to say it out loud. Clara didn't understand why her brother was only mad at her, since she could be beautiful in that dress too. The girl said that it was not a problem for her and offered to go. Clara mentally turned to Martine, hoping she was wrong. But if the Duchess had really set this up, Clara would deal with her after the banquet. The guests were informed that His Majesty the King had arrived. Bastion was accompanied by his sister Clara. People wondered who was walking with him, and some began to speculate that it was Princess Clara by his side. But why were they together? Clara noted that everyone was really shocked, and she wondered what Bastion was thinking right now. The guests began to point out that the dress of the princess and the Duchess were not the same. Words were spread around the hall that the Duchess was poor, for she must be offended that the princess wore the same dress as her. Clara bowed to His Majesty and thanked him for escorting her. She would go. The guests continued to discuss Clara's appearance, asking what was wrong with the princess, and honestly discussing that the dress didn't suit her. Clara decided that she would relieve her stress with food. She doesn't understand why everyone thinks she is the culprit in this situation. Do they really think she will break down over this? Bastion looked at his sister, mentally hoping she was at least chewing. One of the guests approached the king and asked His Highness if the king had tasted the oysters the guest had sent him. The king did not understand which oysters he was referring to. The guest said that yes, these oysters were specially selected, the best in the whole kingdom. Bastion turned to the guest, Mr. Alonso, noting that his memory must be lame, for the king hated seafood. Rising from his throne, Bastion asked if they had not had a similar situation recently. The king reminded him that he had told him not to do this nonsense and not to pester him, but to just do his job. Bastion ordered Mr. Aponso out, to which he was shocked. Clara watched this, noting that as usual someone was unlucky and wondering if her brother had gotten off on the wrong foot again. Clara noticed Bastion looking at her and smiled sweetly at him, which shocked the king. He remembered how the girl had cried, and then he heard the other guests talking. They said of the princess that maybe she did it out of jealousy of everyone, and the adored duchess. Bastion ordered the Duchess of Alba to be summoned here. Martina addressed His Majesty with joy. The guests were delighted that the king had called the duchess to him, and he must see in her a future wife, a queen. At last he would accept the love of a duchess. Approaching the king, Martine clarified whether His Majesty had called for her. Bastion asked if the duchess could go and change into another dress. Martine was taken aback and clarified about the dress. Bastion noted that yes, it was about the dress, since she and the princess had similar dresses. Martine replied that she'd worn it on purpose for the banquet. Bastion angrily clarified that so what, if she meant that she wasn't going to change. Clara realized there was a problem, and then she rushed over to His Majesty, telling him it was all right. She looked at her brother, wondering if those were the eyes of a man who was in love. What nonsense it was to fight over a dress. Had the king really been so angry about the situation all this time? Clara stated that she really thought the Duchess of Alba looked gorgeous. She had a special charm. Bastion repeated twice about the charm, and Clara didn't understand why her brother repeated it twice. The girl bowed to the king, apologizing and asking to let the banquet go on quietly. She really was fine. The king hesitated, but after a moment agreed. Clara thanked him. All the guests were shocked. One of the guests said that he didn't know Bastion was so malleable. Martina ran after the princess, asking her to wait. The duchess bowed to Princess Clara, thanking her. She really liked the dress, and if it wasn't for the girl, the duchess would have been in an awkward position. Martina noted that apparently His Majesty is not in a good mood today, because usually he is kind to her. Clara did not understand what was going on, why the duchess had suddenly become so friendly. The princess thinks that she can't have the duchess's hatred for the princess evaporate so quickly. At this moment, a waiter appeared between the girls. Martina immediately realized and tripped that waiter. The tray with glasses of wine fell right on the hem of the princess's dress and stained it. The waiter immediately began to apologize, saying that he had committed an irreparable sin. Martina shouted for the waiter to be taken out immediately. The waiter began to beg for mercy. The duchess began to question the princess if she was okay, if she had hurt herself, to which the princess replied that she was fine. Martina sadly noticed that the whole dress was soiled. Clara was about to say that she was just going to change, but then she realized and looked at the Duchess of Alba, who was smiling sweetly. Clara turned seriously to Martine, noting that she had lost all fear. The waiter was being led away, and he shouted to the princess that he wasn't on purpose and swore he was. Clara told the guards to wait and let the waiter go. The waiter thanked the princess. Martine reminded the girl that this waiter had spilled a drink on the princess. He should be seriously punished. Clara asked the duchess if she had not tripped the waiter. Martina did not immediately understand. Clara told her not to play dumb, for it was her fault. The duchess was silent at first, but then she remarked that Clara hated her so much, because it was clear as day that the waiter's misconduct was her fault. The duchess, with an arrogant voice, asked the princess how she could accuse Martina without any evidence. It could harm the honor of the duchess. The guests begin to whisper that this is too much, and the princess is crossing the line, dress or no dress. She is already openly picking on the duchess. The guests think the duchess is poor. Here, Clara suggested asking the waiter herself, mentally wondering what the atmosphere was like now. Martina agreed to ask the waiter, adding that she was innocent and had nothing to fear. Martina mentally asked the silly princess, did she really think she had won since there was no one on her side? Bastion turned to the Duchess of Alba, asking her how dare she lie before the king. Martine was dumbfounded. Bastion asked her if she would continue to play the fool, for Clara's words were absolutely true, and he had seen the duchess tripping a waiter. When the Duchess of Alba was saying that His Majesty was in a bad mood, because he was usually nice to her, and a waiter approached her, the king heard everything and wondered when he had ever been nice to her. At that moment, Bastion clearly saw the Duchess tripping the waiter and the tray of glasses falling. It came as a shock. He said that the Duchess of Alba had lost her fear. Martine began to say that she would never do such a thing. The king asked if it was him. The girl replied that no, she didn't mean that. Maybe it was just an accident. The angry king asked her if she really thought it was an accident. The girl asked him why he was doing that to her. It was her, Martina. Whereupon she declared more loudly that she was Martina Alba, his future bride. Bastion smirked and asked her who had said that, rather than him asking her to be his bride. She had made up her own nonsense and was mocking the royal family. Martine replied dejectedly that she had always respected him. Bastion agreed that she had respected him, but he was dragging his sister, Clara Velasco. Martine was silent. The king asked her why she was silent. Didn't she know that the princess was also part of the royal family? Clara called out to His Majesty. Bastion turned to his sister, telling her not to say that everything was fine. Clara stated that she didn't intend to, and added that the Duchess of Alba hadn't shown her proper respect, and it seemed she deserved to be punished for her misdeeds. The guests were shocked and noted that the apple did not fall far from the tree, and they were both tyrants. The king offered a choice. The punishment could be carried out in 3 ways. The first way was prison, the second exile, and the third death penalty. Martine was horrified. The girl did not understand how he could do this to her. He knows what kind of family she is, the king clarified, and that after all, he is above everyone else in this country, or maybe her father thinks he is. Bastion asked her that maybe her father had expanded the territory of the kingdom and ruled. Tears flowed down the Duchess's palette, and she asked His Majesty to spare her. Bastion replied that she shouldn't be begging for forgiveness from him, but from Clara. Clara declared that it wasn't worth it enough. She was choosing exile. The king remarked that this was a good, even excellent choice, and ordered the girl to be captured. Martina continued to plead with the king, but he paid no attention to it. After a moment, Bastion declared that from now on, anyone who dares to allow any misstep to Clara's side will suffer the same punishment. His sister must be treated the same as he was. All the guests bowed and agreed with His Majesty. Clara approached His Majesty with the permission to thank him, for he had helped her a lot. Bastion replied that the girl should not worry, because it was not only because of her that he needed to maintain the authority of the royal power, and he also asked his sister, if such a situation happened, that she should immediately inform him. After a moment, Bastion decided to add one more thing and asked the girl if she wanted to take a walk outside. Once the boys were outside, Bastion turned to Clara, saying that when he saw what had happened. Before he could finish, Clara said that she knew and thanked him, adding that he was the only one she could rely on in this world. The girl herself thought about the fact that even though Clara from the original book hated and betrayed her brother, but now she understood. Bastion had only killed the brothers who had rebelled against him, but he had no intention of harming Clara. The girl thanked him aloud again, and added that together with him she could survive anything. Bastion asked her not to delude herself. He didn't do it because of her. Clara agreed with him, and added mentally that he was so cute when he was shy. She was glad that she didn't have to deal with everything alone, and there was still a lot of work to do, but at least now she wasn't alone. Maid Sarah looked shocked at what was going on, noting that she had only just come out, which was when she saw the princess. There were 3 maids standing in front of the princess. Sarah asked worriedly what was going on here, to which the princess replied that she was choosing new maids. Clara adds that she thinks everyone already knows what happened to Duchess Alba, so she wants to find everyone who served her. Clara thinks they deserve to be punished too, and decided to ask directly if anyone wants to voluntarily confess. Arantxa stated that the dress incident was an accident, and started asking her to believe her. Arantxa added that she wasn't even the Duchess's maid, and really didn't know it would happen. Clara asked Arantxa if that was her confession, since the princess didn't remember saying anything about her separately. Arantxa declared that she was innocent. Clara said that since that was the case, the girl had nothing to fear. They would investigate and find out if Arantxa was guilty or not. The guards approached Arantxa, and then the maid started apologizing to the princess, saying that she was just doing as she was ordered. The girl started asking to be given another chance. Clara ordered to check everyone. She kept only those she could really trust. Sarah clarified with the princess if it was hers too. Clara replied that no, she knew that Sarah wasn't hiding anything from her. Clara noted that in return, Sarah had to be 100% loyal to her so that the princess could rely on her. Sarah thanked the girl and noted that she would always be at her side. Clara was pleased by that. Sarah is only one person on her team, but she is still glad. This is just the beginning after all. The next day, Clara was leaving for Aquila Castle to recruit new maids and wondered if she should stop by to see her brother. She had so much to do lately that she hadn't even visited Prince Daniel. Clara met two men on the street and they said hello to each other. Clara remarked that it was strange. So many people had said hello to her today. The girl was greeted by two maids and asked the princess to pass. Absolutely everyone greeted her. One of the maids asked why the princess had come to them. Clara replied that she had come to recruit new maids. Looking at the maids, Clara didn't understand why they were so excited. One of the maids apologized and stated that it would be difficult to accomplish. Clara asked why, to which she received the answer that, unfortunately, no one had responded to the princess's proposal. It was all because of yesterday. The maids were asked not to tell His Majesty, and they said that they would think of something. Clara noted that the girls were afraid of Bastion, because they realized that now there was someone to stand up for the princess, and she had wanted to do it in a good way before. Clara realized that now, of course, it was good that everyone was now welcoming her, but who knew she wouldn't be able to find the maids? She could understand them too. Many of the maids were of noble descent. True, Clara was saddened. How on earth was she going to get people on her side? But she brought herself to her senses, urging herself to think. Clara told the maids that it was good, and that since she was here, she would go to His Majesty and asked if he was in his room. The maids replied that he was, but that he was in some sort of budget meeting and was not in the best of moods. In the assembly hall, His Majesty indignantly asked to repeat himself again. The seated servants thought they were finished and mentally wondered if they were going to die today. Bastion asked indignantly why they were silent since he had asked them to repeat themselves. One of the servants repeated the increase in the budget for the Canario Palace, where Princess Clara was staying. The servants had already planned the budget and the sudden increase without their knowledge. Another servant, listening to his colleague, thought that he had lost his mind to say such a thing to the king. Bastion urged to continue, wondering what else they were going to tell him. The same man wanted to continue, but his neighbour decided to try to stop him, but he failed, and the man continued that maybe they could increase the budget from next year. Bastion clarified if the council didn't like his decision. The same councilman added that they are just surprised by his decision. It's too sudden for them. A colleague sitting next to him asked what was wrong with him. He needed to calm down. The first man asked the second man if he wasn't curious, but he was told that he wasn't the least bit curious. Mentally, his co-worker stated that if he wanted to die, let him die without him. Bastion stated that he had thought about it and realized that he had neglected Clara all this time. So now he wanted to make amends somehow. And he asked the audience if it was so strange, but the servants said it was not. One of the servants said that he understood the king and would do as the king said. His neighbour did not understand what the atmosphere was, whether his old friend, his comrade and brother was betraying him. Bastion then indignantly clarified about the problem with the budget and said to just take the missing from his, then ordered the one who was against it to be captured. As the man was being led away, he began to plead with His Majesty, saying that he himself had crossed the line. Bastion offered to see how quickly the man had changed. Suddenly, Clara appeared in the office, and everyone at the table immediately stood up. The girl smiled sweetly. Noting that they seemed to be having a heated argument, she should have come back later. The princess asked to continue, noting that she would wait. Bastion asked her to wait for Snarge. The king ordered the door closed, and the guards complied with his order. Clara realized that she had been mistaken. It's not enough to order people to think somehow. She needs to show something herself. It's the same with Bastion. Of course, it's good that they haven't gotten closer, but she can't stop there. Clara took stock of the fact that she's the only loss from her right now, and she needs to change that. Now everyone recognizes her. Bastion cursed, saying that his mood had completely soured. The servants thought about the fact that this meeting had taken a wrong turn, and suddenly he was sending them into exile as well. The king asked them to go on with what was on their agenda. A man began to rise who was mentally addressing his chair and seat. They say he is driving. Remember them, how scared he is. The man began to tell His Majesty that it had been quite some time since Prince Daniel had arrived at the castle. Bastion inquired what this had to do with him, Daniel. The man stated that so many people questioned his condition, whether he was even alive. His neighbours mentally urged him to watch his words. These they still want to live. The man continued that they had heard that he was living in Princess Clara's palace, but had not seen him in person yet. He fretted, summarizing that since he could serve their country to establish good diplomatic relations, it would be best not to keep him locked up, but to include him in the society outside. Mentally, the man thought about the king only not to be killed, but aloud he asked, "Please consider their offer." Another clerk joins him, telling His Majesty that it is right, and they all think so. Another man joined them, saying it seemed appropriate. A great many supported them. Bastion remembered Daniel, repeating the words about inclusion. Mentally, the king wondered why they couldn't just lock him in his room, necessarily letting anything in. Here he remembered Clara's words that before he returned to his homeland, they had better really treat him like a difficult guest. Bastion noted that the girl had said that too, and he thought about it, then stated to the meeting that he thought their words. The king announced that he was already tired, so that was enough for today, and declared that everyone could leave. All the servants bowed and told His Majesty that they would then bow out, and mentally thought about the fact that they had survived. It was then that Bastion was called by Clara. The brother asked his sister why she was a castle. The girl replied that she had some matters to settle with the maids. Clara smiled at Milo, noting that her brother looked tired. Bastion thought that he had to pretend somehow, so that the girl wouldn't realize what they were talking about. His Majesty rose abruptly from his seat, saying that he just didn't sleep well, and the girl shouldn't worry. Clara was shocked and asked if he had not slept well again. The princess asked him when was the last time he even slept properly, to which Bastion replied that it was when they were in the park and a girl was singing him a song. Clara clarified if he was done with all the chores. Bastion confirmed and wondered why she was asking. Clara suggested that he go to the bedroom with her. She wanted to try to help him sleep. The king was indignant at her words. She was a woman. How could she suggest such a thing without a shadow of shame on her face? And anyway, was she going to sing him a lullaby again? Bastion said he didn't need to. That time had been enough, because what would people think of him when they found out? Clara said that he should go to bed now, in case he got sicker and worse. Bastion replied that his body was his business. But after a moment, Bastion still agreed. While in her brother's bedroom, Clara replied that she was so gorgeous. The king urged her to do what she came to do. Bastion, meanwhile, had already made himself ready in bed. The girl asked if he would be comfortable sleeping in his clothes, to which the king replied that it would do. Clara suggested that he at least close his eyes, but Bastion replied that he would close them when he felt sleepy. Clara stated that in order to feel sleepy, you had to close your eyes first, then covered the king's eyes with her hand. Bastion clarified what she was doing. The girl apologized, saying that she didn't do it on purpose. However, the king still agreed to do as she asked. Clara asked if he would sing her a lullaby, but the king was silent. The girl asked if it was not necessary to sing it. But then Bastion suddenly asked his sister if she really thought Emperor Nerya would be able to wake up. He shared that today everyone was just talking about making sure the king treats the prince well. Clara replied that they were only doing it for the best, for they would get no benefit by mistreating the prince. Bastion resentfully noted the words on mistreatment. After all, they fiddle with him every day. Even his sister is with him all the time. Clara told her brother to close his eyes, and the king obeyed her. Bastion stated that he didn't want to let the prince out, but you can't just turn a blind eye to it. Who knew he would still have so many problems after the war? Clara thought about the fact that Bastion might be considered a tyrant, but he was not the kind of man who would sacrifice his country and people for his whim. The girl sincerely wished that Bastion and the real Clara from the book could have such a sincere conversation too. Clara asked the king if he wanted her to think about it, but he didn't understand what she meant. Clara realized that solving the problem with the prince would also help her solve her problem with her possible execution, which meant she needed to think hard. Then an idea came to the girl, and she asked Bastion about holding a tea party and inviting the prince there. That way, Daniel will be able to go out temporarily, and they will get political advantages in the future. If Bastion is worried about how it will go, he can personally come and check it out. Bastion agreed. Clara turned to him and asked if he was asleep. The girl began to wonder if he fell asleep so quickly. What was the problem? Or if he generally only managed to fall asleep when Clara was around. The girl wondered if she was acting like a sleeping pill on people. Clara wished the king a good night's sleep and announced that she would go. As she walked past the maids in the hallway, Clara thought about having to spend everything perfectly so that Bastion wouldn't have an ounce of regret, which meant first. The next moment, Prince Daniel greeted the princess. The girl also greeted him, saying that she had good news. Mentally, the girl realized that this would help strengthen her position. A few days later at Count Montes's house, the girl ran up to her father, telling him that something like this had happened here. The father turned to his daughter Cecilia, asking her what had happened. The girl shared that they said there would be a tea party at the castle, and she was not invited. The girl was shocked that Princess Clara invited her to the castle. The count was also shocked and asked his daughter if she was really going to go there. He was alarmed, for everything was so sudden. The girl replied that she did not know. The count began to walk from side to side, trying to remember how long it had been since the princess had sent the duchess into exile, and whether she wanted to deal with someone else. The count had picked up on the fact that the princess had changed so much lately after all. Cecilia asked her father what to do, for she was afraid to go out with King Bastion, if he really is the tyrant they say he is. The count took his daughter's hands and spoke her name. He confessed to Cecilia that he was honestly afraid of the king too, so he tried to avoid him, to which his daughter replied that she was even more afraid now. Her father shouted, asking what they were in for. Daniel, meanwhile, asked the princess if they were really going to have a tea party. Clara replied that yes, although she was a princess, she didn't know any aristocrats, so she hoped to find like-minded people. And then she decided to ask the prince if he would come to the tea party. The prince was immediately happy and said that he could, at last. Clara informed him that it is not a complete freedom, only for the duration of the tea party he is allowed to go out, and she was not sure he would be interested in purely female company. Daniel asked if the king was coming. Clara repeated the king's question about what he would do alone with the women. Daniel understood the king's answer, but replied that he himself would gladly accept her invitation. The prince doesn't know why the king changed his mind, but he asked her to tell him in words of gratitude. Clara agreed. Daniel awkwardly asked the girl if she was sure she was okay, but Clara didn't understand what he meant. Daniel shared that he had thought that the girl had been against him going out. Clara replied that she wasn't at all. She just needed His Majesty's permission, because if he was okay with it, so was she. The prince was a little saddened by her words, but then stated that he couldn't wait for this tea party. As they walked along the veranda, Clara thought about the fact that she thought for a second that it seemed as if Daniel was upset. Did he really think that the girl disliked him? Clara realized that she was, of course, herself, trying not to get too close to him. She banished those thoughts, however, because she needed to concentrate on the preparations. She needed to send invitations to everyone, and Bastion had promised to help her with the maids. Suddenly, a man appeared in front of her, noting that Clara was still the same, staring at the floor. Clara didn't realize who else it was. She didn't remember him. The man smoothed his hair, saying that even that silly, surprised look on his face hadn't changed. He stated that the girl was like a lost fawn in this big palace. Clara was indignant. Who the hell is this? He made her mood immediately ruined. It was the first time she had seen such a fool since she had been Clara. Did he not know what the girl had done to the Duchess of Alba? And then it began to dawn on her, and she asked the man if he was Hugo Zapatro. The man called the girl a fool, asking if she had forgotten his name just because he had been abroad for 2 years. He had heard that she was having a tea party, so he decided to stop by. Clara was outraged that he had called her a fool and asked him seriously if he was out of his mind, if he had forgotten that she was a princess. The girl did not understand how he dared to allow himself to do such a thing. The man replied that if it weren't for the blood, he wouldn't have said anything. But the girl knew she wasn't a princess. He looked at the girl carefully, not understanding why she was trembling, why her voice was gone, and asked her not to cry. He turned around and asked the princess to say something. He wondered how many men send her letters. He gloatingly asked if there were any aristocrats among them. Clara looked at him carefully, not understanding what was wrong with him, because he was behaving worse than Martina. She wondered how Clara had been able to hold back all this time. Clara noticed that the man had apparently not heard the latest news. The girl decided to tell him how she treated nobles who did not respect etiquette. The man was indignant at the nonsense. Clara asked him if it was true that she had not changed. Hugo replied that the girl did not think otherwise, for the girl always looked down at the floor and could not say a word in front of him, even now. Suddenly Clara slapped him. Hugo was outraged, asking the girl how she dared. The princess replied that she thought it was a fitting punishment for his indecent behaviour. The man started yelling, whether the girl was even aware that no one in the castle even paid attention to her. She was here in her room all the time. Maybe at least she would go outside once in a while so people wouldn't forget what she looked like. Clara told Hugo to calm down and think hard about who was standing in front of him. The girl confidently declared that she was the princess of this country, Clara Velasco, and he had no right to act like that in front of her. Clara urged him to get ready, because she would correct his inappropriate behaviour and teach him to respect people above him in status. Hugo asked indignantly what he meant she would teach him. He didn't understand what had even happened to the princess during his absence. He didn't remember the girl throwing such words before. The princess replied that she had already said it, but she would say it again. The old Clara was gone. She gives Hugo one last chance and tells him to get out now and stay out of her sight, or she will exile him too. Hugo turns to the princess, stating that it's like he's going crazy, not knowing what's wrong with her. He asked her if she was trying to intimidate him. He asked about the exile and wondered where the girl got the courage to send someone into exile. How could she even raise her hand and threaten him? He stated that he would be sure to report everything to the king. Someone asked what was going on here. It was His Majesty the King. Hugo rejoiced at Bastion's appearance, saying he was just in time. The man had already intended to clarify whether the king had seen that the princess had just been to him, but no sooner had he finished than the king grabbed him by the collar. Bastion clarified if he was fed up with his life, how dare he even open his mouth? Hugo did not understand the king's action. Another man flew up, asking His Majesty to let Hugo go. The man also bowed to the princess, saying he deeply apologized to her. Clara recognized it as Hugo's cousin, the Marquis of Zapatro. Hugo told His Majesty that the princess had slapped him first, and it was true. Hugo didn't understand why his brother was apologizing. The king swung around and called Hugo a pervert, followed by a hard slap to Hugo's face. Bastion angrily asked if they hadn't heard what he'd said to Clara themselves. The king turned to the Marquis, asking if he thought his brother had overstepped his bounds. The Marquis looked at his begging brother and, saying that he understood, asked him to forgive his brother. Marquis added that his brother is still very young and doesn't always discern the boundaries of what is permissible. He didn't think Hugo had done it on purpose. Clara clarified, "Isn't Hugo her age? Marquis's brother is no longer a child, and she doesn't think age is an excuse." Marquis went on to ask the princess to forgive Hugo's gaffe. He would apologize to her right away. Clara stated that she had always thrown such antics and clarified how much was okay, because this wasn't the first time he'd crossed the line. She stated that they might not think they could make up for such a transgression with an apology. When Bastion heard that, he was very angry and kicked Hugo in the back, calling him trash. The king asked him how he wanted to die, if he could be put on death row right away. Bastion noted that Clara was too kind. Even the death penalty was a light form of punishment for such people. Hugo asked to wait and stated that he had an important circumstance. He asks to believe. The king inquired as to the significance of this and considered it a nonsense. Hugo began to confess that the princess was actually a princess to him. Clara was curious herself and asked her brother to wait to listen to Hugo. The king didn't understand why the princess was protecting him. The Marquis helped Hugo and asked him how he was. The king ordered him to speak quickly what he wanted. The Marquis also asked his brother to tell them the truth. Hugo stated that he actually liked the princess very much, and that was why he did it. Everyone was shocked. Hugo added that he just wanted to seem cool and daring, to be remembered by her. Suddenly, he asked the princess to become at least friends, and in the future, he wanted to take her as his wife. Clara was shocked. Marquis was also dumbfounded by his brother's words. Hugo continued that it was true, he loved her very much. Bastion could not stand it any longer, and shouting that he had had enough, kicked Hugo in the back once more. The king called him a scoundrel and ordered him to be seized at once. As the guards led Hugo away, he called out for the princess. Bastion declared that he would kill him. Clara asked His Majesty to calm down, but the king told her that the madman wanted to marry her. Clara noted that she could just say no and asked her brother why he was here. Bastion replied that he'd come to see the palace with the officials because of budget problems. But who knew he'd see something like this? The king told the girl not to dare to marry. Clara mentally wondered if she would be alone all her life. The princess told the king not to worry, because she would only date a good man. She didn't know what rumors would be spread about her because of this incident. Bastion said that he would find her a groom himself. The king went on to say that the girl would not marry someone like Hugo. Her fiancé must be a little like him. Clara thought hard about the two Bastions, but agreed aloud. It wouldn't be long before the girl would find out that this commotion would affect the upcoming tea party. After the incident with Hugo, a huge number of people were discussing it. In the Canario Palace, the guards outside Prince Daniel's room also decided to discuss it. A noise outside the door caught the attention of the prince, who was reading a book, and he approached the door. One of the guards said that it was marvelous, but another replied that he did not even know, for His Majesty was very angry. The other replied that it didn't matter, because the main thing was that their princess had been proposed to. These words shocked Daniel. The maids congratulated the mistress, but Clara didn't quite understand them. Sarah shared that the princess had received a declaration of love, also in front of His Majesty. She envied her mistress, for where else would there be such a daredevil? Clara immediately asked Sarah to wait and asked what she was talking about. Sarah asked if the princess was marrying the younger brother of the Marquis of Zapatro. Clara was horrified and flew up to Sarah and began to ask her who told her that and why she thought that. Sarah shared that everyone in the castle is just talking about it, even their new maids. One of the new maids shared that some of the aristocrats said they had personally seen the princess get proposed to. Another new maid shared that many had heard about it from others. Clara sincerely did not understand what was happening now, where these rumours came from. She recalls that sure there were a lot of people there, but the wedding. Sarah clarified if the princess didn't want to get married, because the king wanted to kill her fiancé. Clara replied that wasn't the case. One of the new maids stated that the princess was incredibly kind. She also shared that there were rumours that the girl had personally come to His Majesty and asked him not to kill her fiancé. Clara was puzzled and clarified how other people could know what she and her brother had talked about in private. The new maid went on to say that the Marquis of Zapatro had cried so hard when his brother wanted to be killed. Sarah added that someone had heard the king yelling in the training area, and she was probably there now. Bastion was beating the dummy, yelling that the bastard wanted to steal Clara, and he should have killed him right there. The king was beating the dummy very aggressively, imagining it was Hugo and wishing him dead. Clara was shocked. She had asked Bastion not to kill him, so where were these rumours coming from? She noted that Hugo had been exiled too. She didn't understand what her brother was doing there now. Another newcomer asked Clara if it was true that she was not in love with him. The princess asked them if it was true that they were new, Mia and Emily, I think, and Sarah too. Clara angrily asked them if they would stop talking nonsense and get on with their work. It was tea time today, wasn't it? The maids agreed. Sarah was scared. It was the first time she had seen the princess so angry. Apparently she really liked the Marquis. Clara decided that she wouldn't even pay attention to it. The most important thing for her now was to concentrate on the tea party. Prince Daniel was dressed in a beautiful suit. Clara remarked that it looked great on him. She was so glad that it fit the prince's size. Daniel thanked the princess and said that it suits her very well. Suddenly, Emily, the new maid, introduced herself to the prince. She noted that he would fall in love with all the young ladies at the tea party. Suddenly he. Before she could finish her sentence, however, Clara asked her to calm down. The princess announced that they were all already waiting in the garden and invited the prince to go. Daniel noted that this is his first outing since he got here, and it's so exciting for him. He's already excited. Clara noted that the tea party would be a lot of fun, she promised, and beckoned him to follow her. As they headed for the garden, Daniel asked the princess if she was really getting married soon. Clara asked indignantly where he had heard that, and the prince replied that there was someone at the door. Clara smiled sweetly and said that was not going to happen, mentally noting that those rumours were everywhere. The princess said he wasn't her type at all, and he'd said some nasty things to her. Daniel asked her what kind of men she liked. Clara was surprised by his question, and upon thinking about it, realised that she had never thought about it. The girl answered that they were caring men with good looks. Emily at this point stated that it was straight up their prince. The prince piped up that, yes, that is him. Clara mentally noted that he was very cocky. However, yes, he was handsome and very courteous to Clara. Out loud, the princess said no and told them to go because they were already expected. Daniel noted that he felt sad somehow. Clara didn't understand why she blushed. She couldn't let the prince see her. She didn't want any misunderstandings. Many ladies had already gathered at the tea party. One of them shared with another that she didn't know whether to come or not. Another wondered why they didn't talk to her, although everyone said that she had changed. A girl announced that the princess was coming. Clara thanked the ladies for coming to her tea party. The princess stated that she was delighted to see so many lovely ladies here, and she hoped they would all make friends. She asked them to make themselves at home, and now suggested that they begin the tea party. Cecilia remembered a conversation she had had with her father. He had asked her then if she could not say she was ill and not come, or say that her father had died, and she needed to go to the funeral. The girl didn't understand how she could lie about such a thing. The Count hugged his daughter, worried about what to do, because suddenly she would die. As Cecilia was on her way to the tea party, her father declared to her that she must return alive. Looking at the princess, Cecilia knew she couldn't relax. She had to do it for her father and the honour of their family. She was glad that at least King Bastion hadn't come. Cecilia also noticed that the princess seemed very different. One of the guests thanked Clara for the invitation and shared that she was engaged this fall. The princess asked about the engagement, as she knew nothing about it, and added that it was strange, but she had not even received an invitation. After that, Clara seriously asked the girl if she had not been invited on purpose and why she had brought up the subject at all. The guest apologized to the princess. The other guests remarked that the princess had changed so much, and even her gaze had become more menacing. Clara thought about the fact that she had two tasks at this tea party. First, she had to prove herself, because everyone should realize that she, as a princess, could no longer be considered a princess. Secondly, she wants to make friends, at least find people close to her, and she hopes that there will be at least one such person among all the guests. The princess would also like the tea party to go as she had planned. One of the guests urged the lady to look over there, in the direction of Prince Daniel. The guest did not realize who this guy was. One of the girls said hello to him and apologized for the suddenness, but she wanted to tell the prince that he was very handsome. Daniel thanked her for the compliment. Just then, two other guests cut in. One asked him if he was here with someone, and the other asked if he wanted to have tea with them. Daniel apologized, and then Clara called him, calling him Prince. The girls were amazed that if he was a prince, he was the same Prince Daniel from Narhi. The girls mentally remarked that he was so cool. Clara asked the prince how he liked the tea party. Daniel replied that everything was just fine, everyone was very friendly, and he asked the girl if she had many friends here. Clara answered that not really. Her social skills were not very good, and she found it a little difficult to get along with people. Daniel asked her who she would like to be friends with. Clara looked towards the girls and wondered who she would like to be friends with. She wondered which one of them she could trust. Clara would want this girl to be polite and friendly. Then she noticed Cecilia sitting alone. Cecilia was thinking about how hard it was for her to be here. She didn't know anyone and wanted to go home. Clara appeared next to her and, apologizing, asked her if she would like to share a conversation with her. Cecilia immediately jumped up from her seat, asking the princess why she had approached her. Clara didn't understand what she was talking about. Cecilia apologized, saying she was just confused. She wondered in her mind why Clara had spoken to her, because she wanted to sit quietly and leave. Daniel looked after Clara and pulled back a chair and asked her to sit down. The princess thanked him. Other guests appeared and asked Clara if she would allow them to join, please. But all these ladies wanted to sit next to the prince. Cecilia was alarmed because the prince was here, and for some reason more and more people were gathering at her table. Clara mentally noted that the prince was very popular, but she was angry because she had organized the tea party. But now no one paid any attention to her, and it was beginning to annoy her. Clara gathered herself and clarified that she and Cecilia were meeting for the first time, and offered to get acquainted, to tell her what kind of family she was from. Cecilia replied that she was a countess of the Montes family. Clara asked her why she was sitting alone. Cecilia hesitated, not sure what to say. She just wanted to sit alone. The girl suggested that she could tell her that she was unsociable and had no friends. She doesn't even know how to say it. Clara, in turn, noted that the girl was apparently very shy. Suddenly, the king appeared, noting that it looked like they had quite a few guests and he would be interested. Clara rose from her seat, telling her brother that she thought he wouldn't come. Bastion shared that he'd decided to drop by and asked his sister to mind her own business while he got settled in. Cecilia was terrified, for she was so afraid of King Bastion. The king noted that he and the prince had not seen each other for a long time and asked him if he was enjoying the freedom the king had given him. Daniel replied that he was very happy to be able to get out at least for such a short time, and thanked the king for his generosity. Bastion made a mental emphasis on the prince's words about the short time and called him insolent. The king abruptly stated that he too would participate and sat down in a chair. Daniel sadly noted that it was his seat, to which he received a question from the king as to what was the problem, since he could sit in any other seat. The prince wanted to defend himself, but when he saw the menacing look in his eyes, he said he would sit down. Bastion turned to Clara, telling her to sit down too, or she would just keep looking down at him. The princess agreed and sat next to him, mentally not realizing what was wrong with her brother. He had frightened all the ladies. Bastion was mentally outraged at how the prince had managed to sit next to Clara again. The king bluntly asked the prince that there are plenty of seats, so why is he sitting next to Clara again? Daniel clarified that he wasn't allowed, and if he wanted to, the prince would sit next to him. Bastion indignantly asked who gave him permission to sit next to him. Daniel replied that the king wanted the prince to move, so he should sit next to him, because he did not want to sit all alone. The king said that it didn't matter, and told the prince to move to another seat. Clara asked them to calm down, and announced that there were enough seats for everyone. Bastion stated that he didn't like it, that was all, to which the prince stated that he would stay here then. Clara remarked that it was such a nice day and suggested a better conversation. The guests were in a fuss. What should they do? It was so easy with the prince, but the king frightened them. Clara was puzzled if the girls were leaving and shouted to them to wait. Only the prince, the king, the princess and Cecilia remained at the table. Clara thought about the fact that even though the girls were so happy about the prince's presence, they were now trying to escape. Cecilia watched the princess frown and noted that even she seemed to have grown sad because of His Majesty's arrival. The girl didn't know what to do. Bastion asked his sister what she had been talking about before he arrived. Clara replied that they had just met the lady and struck up a conversation. Bastion stated that it was rather unexpected that the girl was interested in other ladies and asked the girl what her name was. The girl was nervous, but introduced herself that her name was Cecilia Montes. Bastion shared that it was the first time he had seen Count Montes's child, and apparently the girl was not as frightened as the Count, and would not hide from him. Cecilia noted in her mind that if the king knew how scared she was now, because she had met the tyrant king in person. It was her worst nightmare. Bastion noted that Cecilia seemed a fairly conscientious lady and complimented Clara on her excellent choice. The princess smiled sweetly and suggested that Lady Montes get to know each other better. Cecilia wondered if it was true of her. She just didn't understand why. The girl added that it really was an honor, and she thanked the princess for inviting her to tea. Cecilia was uncomfortable and added that she still had a lot to learn and didn't know if Clara would be a good fit. Clara shared that she was making a friend for the first time herself and suggested getting to know each other slowly and extended her hand to the girl. Cecilia wondered about becoming friends with the princess. There was a sharp shout. Everyone at the table flinched and turned toward the sound. One girl stood and waved her arms, to which the king asked what the girl was doing. The girl was actively waving her arms, asking someone to get off. It was a bee. All the girls ran away, frightened. Bastion wondered if they were all so frightened of the little bee. Clara didn't realize what kind of day it was. This bee made the atmosphere at the tea party even worse. Clara asked the ladies to calm down. One of the girls warned the princess to be careful, saying that it flew in her direction. The king shouted for everyone to get a grip already. He said that if they were so afraid of her, he would take care of it. He only asked them to stop squeaking and throwing themselves to the sides, or he would send them into exile. He added that besides, this bee is quite small and you can't even see it. Cecilia kept wondering how she would make it through to the end. Just then, the waiters started serving the cake. A bee landed right on one of the slices, in front of Cecilia. The girl urged herself to hold on. Bastion lost the bee, and then he spotted it on the slice of cake Cecilia was holding. He appeared behind the girl and loudly told her to stand, which made the girl flinch. Cecilia tripped over her own feet and started to fall, but Bastion grabbed her hand, and the cake from her hand flew right onto his head. The bee that had been sitting on that piece flew away. Clara stared at it, noting that it was a horror, this tea party a complete horror. Bastion turned to Lady Montes and asked her if she hated him. There was a commotion between the girls. The king added that if that was the case, let her put it into words. Why was it necessary to do that? Cecilia replied that she had not done it on purpose. The girl remembered her father's parting words to her, that she must return alive, and begged her father's forgiveness, declaring to him that she had failed him and would not be able to return. Cecilia knelt down in front of the king and began to apologize to His Majesty. Suddenly Bastion laughed and said that he himself did not understand why, but it was a very funny situation. Clara ran up to him and ordered someone to bring a towel and see the king off. The girl brushed a piece of cake off his head, stating that his face was all dirty and so were his clothes. She thinks he better go change his clothes. Bastion told Clara that he was fine. In her mind, Clara told him that she didn't care if he was fine or not. She just needed him to leave quickly. Then her tea party would be saved. Clara noted aloud that she should at least get him a change of clothes. The king had agreed to do as his sister wished. Finally, Bastion turned to Lady Montes and said that he would remember what had happened today. And then he waved his hand and said he was going. Looking after him, Clara wondered if her brother meant that he would take revenge. Suddenly, Cecilia began to fall. The princess immediately ran to her, asking if she was all right. Cecilia thought of everything and everyone. She was definitely going to die. After that, the girl got up and apologized to the princess, saying that she would like to leave early. Clara replied that she understood, but urged the girl not to take her brother's words to heart. Mentally, Clara was glad that Bastion hadn't done anything to her, only that was why. The other guests also turned to the princess, saying that it was time for them to leave as well. Everyone took turns starting to say goodbye and thanking the princess for the invitation. Clara was shocked. Were they really all going to leave? Clara looked at the girls leaving, thinking that who knew her plan would fail so miserably. Of course, she guessed that there would be some difficulties, but to have it end in such a failure. The girl clenched her trembling hands into fists, mentally marking that she had failed at even such a small task as the tea party. The prince turned to the princess, asking if she was all right, as she had been preparing for this day. Clara looked at Daniel, realizing that this was his first outing since arriving in Verona, and he must be very sad that it was over so quickly. Clara smiled and mentally realizing that the first pancake was a pancake, replied to Daniel that she was fine. The girl is sure that she will be much better prepared next time, and she needs to make sure that Bastion doesn't come. Clara turned to Emily and asked her to clean up here, please. The maid, of course, agreed. Clara checked with the prince that since this was the case, if he would like to go for a walk. The prince shared that he was glad he had finally met the king, but he was so confused that he had not been able to talk to him properly. Clara remarked that her brother had come to them so unexpectedly after all. Daniel shared that he had even hoped to personally ask the king for permission to leave the castle. He didn't want to burden the girl anymore. He really hoped he could. The prince was sorry it didn't work out. He didn't even know if today was his last day on the outside. Clara noted that Daniel was still not giving up. The girl answered him that she really wanted the tea party to go well, but in the end, there was nothing she could do to help the prince. Danielle didn't know what she was talking about at first. Clara shared that, of course, she was holding the tea party primarily for herself. However, her brother also invited the prince so that people who were worried about his condition would see that Daniel was fine and calm down. The prince was shocked and clarified if it was true, if the king was really worried about her. Clara confirmed it and asked him not to tell anyone about it. It would be their secret. The girl asked him not to worry. He would still have the opportunity to go out, only he would have to get her brother's consent. The prince admitted that he was, of course, glad. Clara shared that her brother has frequent mood swings, so he would probably get angry if Prince kept asking for permission to go out. The prince replied that he understands and reflected. Daniel shared that he hoped that with the princess's help, he could somehow be friends with the king. Clara was shocked by his words about befriending the king. The girl thought that even if the cancer on the mountain whistles, it would be impossible, because they are sworn enemies in the novel. Clara replied to the prince that she thought it would be difficult enough. Daniel noted that, to be honest, it was hard for him to imagine it either. The boys even laughed. The king walked behind them, noting that he wanted to be back before the tea party was over, and although all the guests had gone, Clara and the prince were walking here alone and cooing like lovebirds. Clara wished her brother a good morning. Bastion noted that he had left the tea party before everyone else yesterday and asked how it had gone afterwards. Clara wondered what to say. Out loud, she said that it had not been bad, though they had finished rather quickly. The king rose from his seat and said that today they would paint a portrait of the princess. Clara was surprised, as she already had one portrait. Bastion replied that it was outdated and he had already invited an artist. A guard alerted His Majesty that the painter had arrived. The king noted how quickly and ordered him to be summoned. The nailed artist greeted His Highness and the princess. The girl thanked him for coming. The artist replied that it was an honor to paint the princess. Bastion ordered to put his whole soul into the painting, or else he would tear it out of the artist's body. Clara didn't understand why he did that. While painting the portrait, the king ordered the artist there to try harder, but that the artist replied that he would do his best. Clara didn't understand why Bastion was still standing by her side. The artist asked the princess to look straight ahead, to which the girl agreed. Bastion remembered Hugo's words that he liked the princess and wanted to take her as his wife. The king turned to the girl and clarified that they felt nothing for Hugo. Clara asked indignantly why her brother was talking about him so suddenly. The painter asked the princess to please stay still. The girl apologized and returned to her chair, answering her brother that she didn't like him at all, and she asked why he was talking about him again. She shared that she wanted to forget about him soon. Bastion replied that there are still rumors that they are in love with each other. After that, he remained silent and asked about the prince. Clara didn't quite understand him, and the king himself summarized that the girl liked him. However, the girl asked him why he thought that. Bastion asked the girl why she was reacting that way. Clara mentally noted that he suspected her. The girl replied aloud that she didn't understand how her brother could have such a thought. He was practically their prisoner. The king asked her indignantly why she was being evasive, if she would just tell him whether she liked him or not. Clara shouted that no, she didn't like him and would never like him ever. In her mind, the girl added that if she fell in love with him, she would die. Bastion replied that he understood and asked why the girl would yell like that. The boys became uncomfortable. The king thought about being even more suspicious because of this reaction. Bastion asked the painter if he was finished and decided to take a look. Clara noted that so little time had passed. The king ordered the painting to be shown. The painter turned to His Majesty and warned him that he was not finished. Bastion wondered if he was calling it a painting because it had no soul in it, and he had promised to paint a masterpiece, or if that was his strategy. The artist began to apologize to His Highness. The princess stated that she would look at it too. The artist asked the princess not to move, please. Clara clarified with her brother, "Doesn't it look cute?" The king replied, "It's not cute, it's horrible." Clara noted that the painting was actually beautiful, and maybe it just seemed prettier to him than it really was. The artist mentally thanked the girl. Bastion stated that it was nonsense. There was no soul in the painting. Clara stated that she liked everything and asked the artist to continue. After that, the girl turned to her brother and asked him to calm down. She told him in her mind to stop making scandals. Bastion turned away and noted that the girl called her brother too often. She didn't think he liked it. Mentally, Clara replied that she was sure. The princess returned to her seat and asked the artist to continue. After a while, the artist informed the princess that the portrait was ready. The girl replied that it was even better than in life and that the artist should be well rewarded. Bastion remarked that he didn't even know if he liked it, but if his sister was satisfied, let it be. He released the painter and added that he would be rewarded. The artist bowed to His Majesty and thanked him. Bastion looked at his sister and thought that she must really like it. He reminded the girl that dinner was coming soon and suggested they go together. Clara asked if it was all right. The king replied that, of course, because of the picture they hadn't said who the girl was in love with. Clara asked if they had not finished. Bastion answered that of course not. He had many more questions, and now he could ask them all at once. Clara saw his smirk and wondered if he wanted to interrogate her. At lunch, Clara didn't realize that her brother was going to interrogate her, so why didn't he say anything? The girl decided that before it was too late, she needed to change the subject. Clara asked Bastion where he planned to place the portrait. The king replied that it was none of her business. The girl noted that the conversation had failed, and now the atmosphere was even worse. Clara decided to clarify what Bastion thought about the lady he had met then. The king clarified if his sister was talking about Cecilia Montes. Clara agreed, and added that she seemed like a nice girl. She thought they could be friends with her. Bastion emphasized her words that she was nice, and remarked that his sister was not a good judge of character, especially since she liked the prince. Clara thought sadly mentally that he had said last time that his sister was a good judge of character. She didn't understand why he'd brought up Daniel again. After they had eaten, Bastion asked Clara if the prince had enjoyed the tea party. The girl replied that he had spoken well of it. Bastion said that he planned to hold a formal dinner soon. Clara remarked that they had, after all, just held a public event. Mentally, the girl wondered why that would be. He was worried that the prince would not leave the room again soon. The king came up and said that he was going to host a dinner in the next 2 days. The princess needed to give it to him. He decided that he would go. Already approaching the door, Bastion stopped abruptly and turned to his sister and shared that the girl had been smiling all the time lately. Clara didn't understand what that meant, if he was imagining things again. She wondered if he thought there was something between the princess and Daniel again. Clara realized that this was bad. She couldn't have the same ending as in the novel. She needs to distance herself from Daniel, keep her distance. 2 days passed. Daniel stated that it was great. Just like the princess said, the king once again allowed him to go out. Daniel asked the girl what was wrong with her. She looked so sad. Clara turned away and replied that she was fine and offered to go. The prince followed the princess and thought about the fact that just 2 days ago they were chatting and smiling so sweetly at each other, but now she seemed so aloof. He wondered if maybe the king had said something wrong to the girl. Of course the prince knew the king wasn't the nicest person, but when he met him in person, he can't let it go like that. He decided to ask the king personally, since he doesn't want the princess to know about it. One of the officials remarked that they had been gathering so often lately. His interlocutor asked if he had heard what happened at the tea party. His wife said there was such a thing. Both officials simultaneously wondered if they would get anything for this talk. The guests were informed that Princess Clara and Prince Daniel had arrived. Bastion noted that here they were. The princess greeted His Highness. The king noted that he and the prince saw each other so often, to which Daniel thanked him for the invitation. Bastion stated that he hoped they had a lot of fun. Daniel noted that there were so many unfamiliar dishes and asked the princess if she would help him. He pointed to one appetizer and asked what it was. The princess replied that it was jamin, an aged raw ham. Daniel continued to ask about the other appetizers. Suddenly, Bastion called out to him and motioned for him to step aside. Clara wondered what he wanted from the prince now. Out loud, she wanted to ask where they were going. The king stated that the prince had been living in their country for months now. Did the girl think he still needed her care? Daniel sharply stated that yes, he does need her care. The king was shocked, and Daniel added that Bastion himself didn't understand the contradictory nature of his situation. He declared that the king should release him, let him move around freely, then he wouldn't have to rely on anyone. The king got angry and broke his wineglass. Clara was shocked, for Bastion was angry. She didn't know what they should do now. Clara remembered telling the prince that her brother's moods often changed. She didn't understand why he suddenly acted like that, if there was something she didn't know. Bastion said that the prince was a master of the tongue. It turns out that if he let him go, the prince would no longer need Clara. The king declared that Daniel should know his place. The prince replied that at least not as much as he does now. Bastion angrily asked him if he really thought he was their guest, since he was their hostage. Do hostages have something to claim? After all, the prince is not in that position. Daniel replied that he was well aware of his position and that he was causing everyone nothing but inconvenience. However, this was never the way royalty was treated in the empire, under any circumstances. The prince stated that he was asking for permission to go out at least to the garden, and that was it. He was quite close to the palace. Clara thought that even that was too bold. Bastion would never agree to such a ruse. The girl realized that she had to stop this conversation. It was going nowhere anyway. Clara turned to her brother. The king angrily asked if the prince remembered how he got here. He had lost, fallen in their battle. The prince replied that Bastion had attacked him with his knights, and he could not accept it as a fair defeat. Clara called her brother even louder, and noting that she was very hungry, asked if they could all go to the table. Bastion urged her not to even try to change the subject. He clarified, "The girl is trying to protect the prince right now." Clara stated that she just wanted them all to be able to enjoy the evening. They were all looking forward to it. She stated that because of the two of them, no one can even breathe without fear. Bastion stated that he didn't care and could kick everyone out altogether. However, the girl did not understand why he had invited the guests, not to intimidate them. The king asked if she thought he had frightened everyone. Clara replied that yes, she was even afraid to talk about it. She urged the prince to stop, adding that she understood him, but now was not the best time. The girl noted that she did not know why, but the king had calmed down, and it was not worth provoking him again. She asked, for her sake. Daniel was silent at first, and then agreed. The girl invited dinner. The officials looked at the king, wondering what was wrong with him, or he was too calm. They were scared. The king tapped his chair and glanced nervously in the direction of the prince and princess. Bastion thinks he's being insolent, not understanding how he even dares to look at Clara with that face. It really pisses him off. Bastion said aloud that the prince seemed to have many more grievances against him and asked if he wanted to continue. Clara noted that he was at it again. She turned to the prince and asked if it was true that he was having fun. Bastion noted that Clara wasn't his bodyguard, so the prince would have to answer for himself. The prince stated that he wanted to challenge the king to a duel. If they face each other one-on-one, the prince will definitely not lose. Daniel hoped the king would agree. Bastion jumps up from his seat and declares that the prince sees no boundaries at all. He says he won't lose, so that's what he's been thinking all this time. Clara noted that it had started again and turned to her brother. Bastion said okay. He accepts the prince's challenge. They will fight one-on-one. Daniel asked if the king really agreed. Bastion replied that he did, because he would win again and nothing would change. If the prince wins, the king will give him his freedom, but if not, The king thinks that everything is clear here. The king stated that they will see who is who. Daniel declared that Bastion had made a wise decision. Clara didn't understand what was wrong with them. Did the horses manage to turn the dinner into a showdown, or did it only look like thunder to her? Bastion stated that the duel would take place tomorrow, and he had said everything. He would be going, so he wished everyone a good evening. Clara asked to wait, asking where he was going. She shouted for him to listen to her. Bastion stopped and turned to Clara and asked her what she wanted to say. The girl noted that the situation was escalating, and she didn't know what she should do to stop it. To her brother, she replied that she just didn't know why they would have this duel out of the blue. Bastion stated that the prince himself was constantly provoking him, and the idea of him, the king would just prevail and shut him up for good. Clara stated that she was worried that he might get hurt in this duel, and she decided to clarify if the duel could be cancelled. Bastion was outraged. Does his sister really want him to ignore the challenge of the prince whose country they had defeated in the war? The king replied to Clara that she was worrying for nothing, for he would still prevail and show this puppy his place. Clara was horrified, mentally declaring that this was the end and there was nothing more to add. She didn't understand why he had to necessarily put the prince in his place. She was asking him not to fight after all. If she'd known it would happen, she would have kept her mouth shut. Looking at Daniel, she realized that he did it on purpose. Clara asked the prince if he really wanted to fight. She was worried about him too. Daniel smiled and told the girl not to worry. He wasn't going to lose either. Clara didn't understand what was wrong with them. They were as stubborn as donkeys. Who knows how this duel will end, and given their explosive nature, they're both sure to go all the way. That means one of them might. Clara was terrified that Bastion would die, for in the novel, her death would follow immediately afterwards. Clara clutched her throat and realized that there was no way that could happen. The girl clarified that they could compete in another way. She pointed out that there were many safe options, such as playing cards and so on. Bastion said that the most interesting thing in such duels is the blood of the opponent on his sword. Clara doesn't even want to hear about it. The girl thought about it and suggested how about archery? Whoever has the most hits on the target wins. Daniel looked at the king and said he would like that. Bastion replied that he didn't care because he was good with a bow. Clara was pleased, for they had both listened to her. She summarized that they had agreed on archery, which was much better than a sword duel. Bastion added that, as he had said, he didn't care, but in exchange for his agreement, the girl would be the judge. Clara was dumbfounded, to which the king pointed out that it was her idea, so let her take responsibility. Bastion told the prince that if he loses, he can't even look out of the window of his room and no more objections about it. He ordered the prince to get ready. Daniel accepted that, adding that he should win. Clara thought about the fact that although she had sidestepped the worst-case scenario, who knew what would happen next? The maids were encouraged by the information about the competition, except that Clara was saddened, for she would have to be a judge. The maids had no idea what had happened at the formal dinner. Clara said that things were bad and unlikely to get better in the future. The maids asked if they could go with the princess. They wanted to support someone. The girl clarified who they wanted to cheer for, the prince. One maid agreed at first, but immediately changed her answer to say that it was for the king, of course. The other maid said that it was a good idea anyway, because Clara could change the score in someone's favour. The princess was glad that she could, and thanked the maids. Clara added in her mind that she could really take control of the competition, and so everything should go smoothly. The next day, one arrow missed its target. The guests saw that the first arrow had missed the target, and noted that it was not a good start, but they were sure that their king would win. The prince was also wished good luck. Clara was tense, and wondered if they were in too much of a hurry. There were also knights practicing there right now who greeted the princess. There were still a lot of people here, which started to worry the princess. Bastion smilingly pointed out that all the people were here to see the prince lose. The prince said that he was sure the princess would judge them fairly, and asked her if she promised. Clara replied that of course she promises, and will take neutrality. It was a lie. Even if the girl is trembling with excitement, she must finish this duel without sacrifice, no matter what it costs her. Everyone was informed that the contest between His Majesty Bastion and Prince Daniel was about to begin. The contest would be considered over when the arrows ran out and the contestants were wished good luck. The prince said he wanted to thank the king again for agreeing to this impertinent request. He hoped for a decent game. Daniel held out his hand for Bastion to shake, but King knocked it away. The king checked with him, wondering if he should just shut up and be done, pissing him off every time he opened his mouth. Let him not even dare look in Bastion's direction after this contest. Clara looked at them, wondering if they were fighting again. The girl called them and asked them to stop fighting. They had enough. The start was coming soon. Bastion said that the girl should announce the beginning, why she was so slow. It was her first time as a judge. His words angered the girl. She wished she could punch him once. Clara stated that they could start. One of the guards waved a red flag, signaling that the contest was about to begin. The first arrow flew. The people shouted that their king was as beautiful as ever. He was the hero of Verona and hit the target. Someone complimented him on being so awesome, to which the king replied that it was a slight. Clara looked at her brother, noting that he had grown so quickly, which is what they call vanity. The prince fired his own shot and also hit the target. The red flag attendant reported that both shots hit right on the 10. It was noted that Daniel had shown himself so dashing in the first round. He was not at all inferior to the king. The prince was also described as beautiful. The ladies didn't know who to choose. They were both so cool. Clara noted that there were so many spectators, and she wanted to finish quietly and leave. Now it's going to be so noisy until the finale. Bastion called the prince insolent and fired a second arrow straight at the target. His Majesty only has 100% hits at the moment and will definitely win. The prince followed by launching an arrow and also hit right on target. People started to wonder if Prince Daniel is not the same. He is a very good shot. The red flag attendant announced that it was an exact hit. Clara commented that they are both so good, and it seems to be clear here without a judge. People were talking about how they both did just as well in the second round. They really are good with the bow. Everyone was interested in who would win. Bastion declared for the guests to stop making noise. He turned to the prince, saying he recognized his skills, and apparently he was wrong to look down on his education. Daniel thanked His Majesty, noting that he didn't think he'd ever get the king's approval. Bastion declared that it was nonsense after all. He was still not as good as him. Even if the king recognized the prince's skills, nothing had changed. He would still win. The king's third arrow once again accurately hit the target, which was announced to him by Clara. The king stated that he could actually see for himself. His eyes were in place. She didn't understand why he was yelling again. Because of the prince. Clara looked at the score and noted that, although Bastion was good, it was still a draw. If it continued like this, they could say they had escaped all danger. Clara chimed in that they were both doing great and wished them luck. The girl hoped it would end that way. The prince took aim. The guests noted that he is so confident, although he is a prisoner, but he shows very good skills. A man asked the boys who were chatting if they should not study, they should try for the good of the king and the country. The boys immediately apologized. The older man emphasized especially on the newcomer to make him more mistake-free. The boy thought about how he missed when he glared at the princess. He shouldn't do that in front of the others. He took aim, but kept looking at the princess. Rumor had it that she was very beautiful, but he didn't expect her to be that beautiful. Those beautiful violet eyes, how he wished he could always look at them. The elder walked over to the apprentice, asking him if he was crazy. Let him watch where he was shooting. The arrow from the apprentice's bow flew straight at the princess. She was yelled at to be more careful. The girl at this moment was thinking about the arrow flying straight at her. Is this really how the girl will die? Would she die again? But since she had been reborn as Clara, she hadn't done anything yet. Clara realized that he did not want to die, and mentally began to ask someone to save her. Suddenly, a friend's arrow shattered an arrow flying straight at the princess. The prince turned to the girl, asking the girl if she was all right. Suddenly, Clara began to fall, and everyone rushed to her. Bastion worriedly asked the girl if she was hurt, how she was feeling. The girl replied that she was fine. The prince clarified if everything was really fine. Clara replied that yes, She was just very frightened and thought she was about to die. The prince said that he thought the girl had dislocated her shoulder a bit, and he thought that she should be examined by a doctor. Clara replied that she would just go to her chambers. Bastion cursed and immediately started asking who did it, who dared to shoot at the royal family. The prince informed His Majesty that the arrow had come from the other side and pointed his finger. The teacher stood up for the student and apologized, saying that he was the one who had failed to teach the boy properly. It was all his fault. Bastion declared that meant both heads would fly. He didn't care and ordered them captured now. The apprentice began to apologize to His Majesty. Clara turned to her brother, saying it was an accident. Bastion angrily asked his sister if she didn't realize that she had almost died. Clara thought about the fact that she didn't want anyone's death. The girl stated that it was not worth it to treat other people's lives so harshly. The prince noted that the girl had experienced a great shock, and he thought it was better to call a doctor, but Clara replied that she shouldn't. Bastion pushed the prince, sweat the princess, telling him to move away. The king lifted his sister in his arms, to which the girl replied that she can walk on her own. Bastion stated for the girl to just rest in the palace. He will get a doctor to have the girl examined and these two to jail until sentencing. Carrying the princess away, the king ordered the prince to be locked in a room. Clara informed her brother that she was really fine, but she was a little embarrassed, so she asked to be released. The king pointed out that she was a princess, so who was she to be ashamed of? Bursting into the room, Bastion ordered a doctor to be called quickly and a bed prepared for the princess. The maids immediately fussed. Bastion paced around nervously. Clara stated that she had said she was fine, hadn't she? Even though she was scared of possible death. But this fussing around is worse. She just wants to go home. The doctor alerted that the princess was fine. There were definitely no health problems. Bastion clarified if the doctor was sure of that, he would pay for the mistake with his head. Bastion ordered the maids to keep an eye on the girl while he stepped away. Clara asked her brother where he was going. The king said he would check on the prisoners in the jail. Suddenly, Bastion turned to Clara and apologized. He shouldn't have taken her to the competition at all. It was all his fault, his mistake. Clara got up on the bed. She didn't understand why he was apologizing, didn't understand him at all, and that only made it scarier. Bastion was puzzled why the girl was looking at him like that. He asked her to lie down in case she got worse. Clara replied that it was all right. She could sit up. The girl noted that despite his oddities, Bastion cared for Clara. The king was outraged at the look on her face. He ordered her to lie down quickly. The girl did lie down. Bastion notified that he went and ordered her not to move and let her just try to get up. The girl noted that he had always been his own man. It was hard to understand him, considering both his good and bad sides. As he walked away, Bastion found himself thinking. He remembered the moment when the prince had shouted to the princess to be careful, and it was he who had shot down the arrow flying at Clara. Bastion remembered something else and declared that he was granting freedom to the prince, for now only to the garden. Clara was indifferently surprised. Bastion stated that he was going to send him far away, so he wouldn't bother her anymore. Clara immediately stood up abruptly, questioning if she had heard correctly, for the king had not lost. Bastion replied that the outcome of the contest was not that important. He just couldn't ignore his act. The king asked the girl not to worry. After all, he is doing what he should. Clara was shocked. How he changed his mind so abruptly, she refuses to understand. Maybe it's not her who is sick, but Bastion. The next day came. The maid shared that the prince literally drew his bow in an instant and shot to save the princess. He is so good with a bow, they were all very surprised. The maid noted that she didn't want to go at first, but her girlfriends called her over to watch. She was so happy to see this great moment. In her opinion, the prince is so cool. The princess clarified if he really did them. After all, she didn't see anything, as she closed her eyes in fear. The maid confirmed her words. Everything happened so fast. How did the prince only have time? Clara thought about how the prince could have hit that arrow. It was right in front of her eyes. And then she realized why Bastion had freed Daniel. Of course she knows that Bastion treasures Clara, and her life was in danger. Anyway, it ended with the prince being freed and no one getting hurt. Not much left to do. The guard apologized to the princess for calling her here. The girl replied that it was fine and clarified if it was a long walk. The guard replied that they were almost there, and His Majesty was waiting for her. Bastion noted that the girl had arrived. The boy who had shot the princess was behind bars, all battered and with tears in his eyes. The king asked the boy how he wished to die. The boy began to beg for mercy, saying that he had done it by accident. Clara asked him why the arrow had gone straight at her. The boy confessed that he had just stared at the girl when he was holding the bow and had accidentally let go of the bowstring, because the girl was so beautiful. Bastion was angry that this was his excuse. He was already running out of time. What kind of nonsense was he talking? The boy admitted that it was true and asked him to believe him. The king shouted that he didn't even want to listen, and declaring that enough was enough, ordered the boy to be led to his execution. The boy appealed to the princess, asking her to have mercy. The girl offered her brother to pardon him. Bastion was shocked that she was asking to keep him alive. Clara pointed out that she was alive. Bastion asked the girl how she could believe him, as it was a complete nonsense. Clara noted that he knew that there was no point in killing her, since she had no power or influence. Besides, if he really did it by accident, killing him would be a mistake. But since the girl really could have been hurt, the boy still deserves jail time. Clara thinks it's the right thing to do. The boy thanked her. Bastion resented it. The girl, on the other hand, is just glad he called her beautiful. Clara stated that she didn't care what he thought of her. Bastion stated to let the guy so-and-so know that he was only alive because of Clara's kindness, would rot in prison for years. The king would leave the rest to the judge, after which he called Clara to go so they wouldn't waste any more time on such garbage. Bastion turned to Clara, telling her not to let anyone else get away with anything. She had royal blood in her, so she needed to gain confidence. The girl thanked him for supporting her and for his decision to let the prince go. Bastina noted that he was afraid that the girl had misunderstood him. He was grateful to the prince for saving the girl, but still it was not complete freedom. The guards would always follow him wherever he went. Bastion notified that he had one important thing to do, but he did not tell Clara, but asked her not to take it into her head. The girl was walking down the street, not understanding what he meant. Suddenly the prince appeared and greeted the princess. The girl ran up to him and asked him what he was doing here. Daniel replied that the king had allowed him to leave the room and tend the garden for an hour at a time. Clara was shocked to hear about tending, but where is it that the main characters in novels sweep the garden paths, and Daniel is the one who tends the garden? The girl realized that was why her brother had smiled so wryly then. Everyone in this family was the same. She would hate for Daniel to have to face that kind of treatment. The prince shared that it was the first time he was cleaning the garden. He was so excited, and most of all, he was glad that he could go outside. Daniel asked him to convey his thanks to the king. Clara noted that he was apparently happy, and since when the garden was so clean and beautiful. The girl realized that the main thing is that the prince likes it. He adapts to everything very quickly. That's the power of the protagonist. Daniel noted that the girl seems to be fine, and he is so glad. He was very worried about her, and it was good that there were no repercussions. Clara replied that there shouldn't have been, and she should thank him. She was told that he was the one who had saved her back then. Daniel noted that he had only done what anyone else would have done in his place. The king had been so worried about her. Apparently the two of them were close. Clara noted that of course they were. They were brother and sister. The prince remembered that. The girl didn't quite understand his reaction. It was strange for him to appreciate his family members. Clara shared that she would like her brother to live happily ever after. He was her only blood relative now. The prince noted that the king would be happy to hear that. The girl asked him therefore not to fight with her brother anymore. She didn't want anyone to get hurt. Daniel didn't understand who the girl was referring to which Clara replied that she was referring to the two of them. He mused that that was why the girl had talked them out of the sword fight. Clara replied that yes, her brother should live for a long time, and then she mentally added that then she would be alive too. The prince asked if the girl was afraid that Daniel would kill her brother. Clara asked him not to say such words even in jest, for he knew what could happen. Daniel asked her not to worry. He didn't want that at all. Clara pouted, stating that it was very important to her. The prince didn't know how to make the girl believe, he thought for a moment, and then held out his hand to her. Clara did not understand why he held it out to her, but put her hand in it. The prince kissed her hand and added that with this kiss, he was making her a promise, and asked her if she believed him now. Clara was surprised. He kissed her hand so suddenly, and how should she react to it? One of the maids asked a friend if the princess was really surprised, to which the other replied that she was. The girls noticed that it was the same prince and princess in the garden. The maids turned to the girl, and the princess remarked that she had to go. Apparently the maids had something urgent to do. She said goodbye to him and, apologizing, ran off to the maids. Clara didn't know what to do, why she was so red. She couldn't even answer him anything intelligible. The maid greeted the princess and asked what they were talking to the prince about, if they were interrupting. Clara stated that they were talking about nothing important, and wondered why the maids had responded to her. The maids apologized, noting that they just wanted to say hello to her. Clara suggested that they just want to chat. One of the maids shared that her friend was dating a young man who was 5 years younger than her. Clara was surprised that she was 5 years younger and asked how old he was. The maid replied that he was 18 and that it had become popular to date younger guys. Clara was shocked. One of the maids turned to the other, asking her what she was saying. The prince looked at Clara chatting with the maids and wondered if this was her urgent business. He noticed that the girl was so good with the maids and smiled all the time, even though at first glance she seemed very cold and moody. Now he understands why King Bastion cares so much for the girl. Where else would he find a younger sister as nice as her? Daniel wishes the relationships in his family were the same. The prince remembered her calling out to her brother, asking him what he had done wrong while running after him down the hall. Daniel's brother then asked him if he was completely stupid or pretending to be so, if he didn't remember what had happened at dinner. The emperor informed him that Daniel was well trained, a fine quality for a future lord. Father compared them then. Daniel's brother thinks he is the future lord, not the prince. Daniel's brother told him to stop playing dumb and hiding behind that smile. He's acting just like he did back then with Mother. Daniel only knows how to play tricks behind his brother's back. Daniel's brother then grabbed him by the collar and declared that he never thought of him as his brother, and that he was pretending to his father that all was well between them. The prince's brother ordered him not to show his face again if life was precious. Daniel isn't torn to the throne. He doesn't care. He just wanted his brother to recognize him. Daniel wondered if his brother would be happy to know he was alive, if anyone was even waiting for him in Nerja. Those discussing it came to the opinion that it was necessary to leave him in prison, because even if it was really an accident, the life of the princess herself was at risk. Many supported such a decision, noting that there is nothing to even think about. They agree with such a verdict. Bastion said that he was glad they had reached a unanimous decision and would consider the trial to be over. The judges rejoiced mentally that so quickly they would now go home and have a good rest. But then the king remembered something else and said that he planned to hand over the palace to Kayla and asked them what they thought. Palace means that Clara will be given the land. One of the judges pointed out that since the girl has never ruled the land, who knows? Even though this territory is small, what if the girl can't handle it? Bastion said to the judges to finish, if they doubted the princess of their country so much. The judges said no way. Bastion asked them what else to say then, but it was just land, and if they had nothing to add, it was settled. A man entered the office and informed His Majesty that he had brought the documents that the king had requested. The judges were dumbfounded when they heard about the documents. Bastion pointed out that they were the documents for the palace land. Bastion signed and stamped his name and declared that it now belonged to Princess Clara. The girl was shocked. Bastion remarked that it was a small but rich territory. There was even a forest, and the girl would love it. Clara thought it was too much, which angered Bastion a little. Clara emphasized that he had granted her land, since she had nothing. The king said that was the problem. Where is it seen that a princess has no property of her own? Even a beggar has more property than Clara. The girl did not understand what he wanted to say, so Bastion asked her to accept the gift, and that was all. The girl replied that she really wasn't sure. She understands, but she doesn't know how to manage the land. It seems burdensome. Bastion didn't understand what there was to worry about. The land had been looked after before her, and he would be helping Clara too. Bastion informed her that he had already signed all the documents, so there would be no refusals. Clara saw that the papers were indeed signed. It looked like she had no choice, but it was coercion. Bastion said that since they had agreed, he would go, and when the weather was nice, he suggested that she go there together. Clara asked her brother to wait, but the door to the room slammed shut and the girl was left alone. She didn't understand why he was forcing her, giving her the land out of the blue. Of course, it was strange for a princess to not have her own land, but Bastion hadn't even asked. Clara doesn't know anymore. Since the lands have been granted, she will gladly accept the gift, and her head is full of other things anyway. Despite the fact that the reception was not very successful, we can say that the duel ended in a favourable way for everyone. The prince even got some freedom. Clara thought about the fact that nothing else was going to happen. Sarah asked the princess what she was thinking about, to which Clara replied that it was nothing. She noted that the maid looked very happy and wondered if something had happened. Sarah replied that it was just a nice day, probably because of the weather, because on days like this, you should definitely go on a picnic. Daniel was in the library studying books. He noticed the princess and asked her why she was here. Clara was dumbfounded. He had just come to borrow a book and didn't expect to see him here. She still felt uncomfortable looking into his eyes after kissing his hand. The girl told the prince that she just loved reading and often came to the library, and then she asked Daniel if he liked reading too. The prince answered that yes. Right after cleaning, he asked permission to come here, and he was really glad that he met Clara here. The girl asked him what book he was reading. Daniel revealed that it was a book about the history and politics of Verona. Neria also had many such books, but he would like to read something about their country, and he learned a lot of new things. Clara thought about how great Daniel was, since she had always borrowed only novels from the library. She also realised that she had offered to read novels to him all the time when he was locked up, and she was certainly not ashamed, but very embarrassed now. Daniel asked the princess what kind of books she liked. The girl realised that she couldn't say the same about the books she had read in her past life. She answered Daniel's question that she liked Basil's books. Clara was surprised and remarked that she and the prince even had the same tastes. Daniel shared that when the girl mentioned him, he wanted to reread his books and thought he should look for him on those shelves. Clara asked the prince to wait, for they could just check with the librarian. However, the prince was very quick. Just then, Clara noticed Basil's book. However, it was too high up, and they should have called the librarian after all. Clara noticed a ladder, and when she reached the book, she thought that it was good that the ladder was nearby, and now the girl could reach it herself. She reached for the book, noting a little more. But as she grabbed the book, her trembling foot slipped, and Clara started to fall. But the girl was caught by Daniel and told her to be careful. She just needed to call out to him. The prince checked with the girl to see if she was okay. Clara realised they were too close and said she was fine, then asked the prince if he himself was fine. The prince replied that of course he was fine, but Clara pointed out that he had caught the falling man. Daniel stated that he was fine, since the girl wasn't heavy at all, and he was fine. Clara thanked him. The prince noted that he was glad that the girl was not hurt, because if it had happened, he would have had to apologise personally to His Majesty. He would probably get very angry and lock Daniel in his room again, so rather the prince should thank the girl. Clara thought about the fact that Bastion was capable of such a thing, and she wanted so much for them to get closer. Suddenly, Clara turned to the prince and asked him if he wanted to go on a picnic together. The prince asked if His Majesty would be there. Clara replied that yes, she, the prince, and Bastion would be there. Daniel noted that he didn't think he would like it. Clara noted that the prince had been in Verona long enough that she really wanted them to become friends, and if the prince agreed, the girl would try to convince him. Daniel shared that he himself would like to see the relationship between them improve. Clara clarified with the prince if he could go for her. Daniel looked embarrassed and blushed, and after a while replied that of course, and he relied on the princess. Bastion remarked that it was a great idea to go to Palace for a picnic, but he asked his sister why she wanted to invite the prince as well. Clara said that if they were friends, it would be better for everyone. Bastion didn't understand why he would even want to be friends with the prince. Clara replied that since the prince would be returning to his home, didn't the king think their relationship would be good for the diplomatic situation between the countries, and the prince was so eager to see Palace. Bastion said that they could only go together. He had already given him his freedom, so what more could he do? Clara took Bastion's hand and asked him not to say that. They could always go together, but this was the prince's only chance. He didn't have long to live in Verona, so he had to make the most of the time he had left. Bastion looked embarrassed and asked the girl why she had grabbed his hand so suddenly. Clara continued to hold his hand, asking him to please allow it. She wants the prince to speak well of Verona when he returns home. It will favour the king's reputation and the glory of the kingdom. A confused Bastion said he would think about it and asked the girl to let go of his hand already. Clara clarified if he promised, but Bastion repeated for her to let go. He asked the girl how much longer she would call him brother. He agreed, just don't let the girl think it's for the prince. Clara replied that she understood. Bastion stated that he would set a date for the picnic when he checked his schedule. The girl could tell the prince so. He added that he hoped the weather would be nice and stated that he would go. Clara was surprised and thought about the fact that her brother had agreed so easily. She thought he would refuse to the last. It seemed to her that after the contest, the king had become softer, and if so, the relationship between him and the prince could really get better. The boys rode in the carriage and Clara looked out the window in surprise. Bastion inquired what she was about. The girl replied that it had been so long since she had travelled anywhere out of the castle, and mentally added that she was in the capital for the first time at all. She remarked that Verona really was a great country to live in. Everyone seemed so happy, and Bastion was a really good ruler. The king asked his sister if they would step outside for a moment. No one here would recognise them anyway, so they could pass quietly. Clara replied that of course she would like to. Walking down the street, Clara expressed delight. Bastion asked the girl if she liked it, to which the girl replied that she liked it very much. The prince came out of the other carriage and asked where they were going. Bastion pulled Clara close to him and asked the prince why he cared where they were going. Clara reminded her brother that they had come here all together. Bastion clucked and clarified what was unclear. They just decided to walk down the street and maybe buy something if Clara liked it. The king turned to the girl, asking her what she would like, if she would just say it. Clara was embarrassed, for she had only thought of going for a walk. Bastion sharply suggested going to the most expensive place, but the girl started to refuse, asking her brother if he could hear her at all. The boys looked at the necklace and Clara declared that she didn't want jewellery. She didn't understand why their walk had turned into a trip to jewellery houses. Just then, the girl noticed the prince coming in as well. Bastion gloated, noting that he couldn't buy anything anyway, so why should he come in at all? Clara clarified why the prince couldn't buy. The king reminded her that he was a hostage. Where could he get the money from? Clara mentally realised that she hadn't thought of that, and replied mentally to her brother that it was his fault. He had blamed him somewhere and treated him that way. The prince appeared next to the guys and asked them what they were talking about. He had already looked around outside and decided to come in. Clara replied that it was nothing like that, not just looking around, and Bastion noted that it was unlikely that the prince understood anything about it. Daniel stated that he was actually good at jewellery and asked the princess if he could pick something out for her. The prince began to peruse the display cases. Looking at one of the necklaces, he noted that this ruby looked beautiful. It would go very well with the princess's eye colour. Clara thought that the ruby really suited her. Bastion asked if she liked it. Clara wondered if her brother would be offended if she said yes. She answered aloud that yes, it was beautiful, but all the jewellery here was very beautiful, and she didn't even know. King stated that in that case they don't buy everything they have. The consultant clarified if they really want to buy everything they have. Bastion replied that they did, and asked them to pack faster. Clara turned to her brother, saying that one piece of jewellery would be enough. The king told her to stop being shy and just accept his gifts. The girl mentally asked him if he thought it was a picnic. Daniel noted that the necklace he had picked out for the princess, complete with ring, suited her very well. The girl thanked him. Bastion pointed out that he had paid for everything, but his sister was thanking someone else. Clara was indignant at their behaviour on such a nice day. The weather was perfect today, so she asked them to stop fighting and suggested that they go to lunch soon. Bastion wondered what was so sudden, but the princess only hurried him and her brother agreed. The girl also asked the prince to get into the carriage. Clara stated that she was just in a wonderful mood. However, mentally the girl thought about how much longer she has to watch their feud. A table with a lot of sweets was set up for the boys in the garden. Clara asked if the picnic was usually like this, to which her brother replied that no, it was just that he was well prepared. The princess said that it was really not what she had imagined, but she liked it very much. Princey thanked them. It was the first time he had felt so alive in a long time, so I didn't know how to express my gratitude. Bastion stated that he didn't need it, and the prince should thank Clara for inviting him to the picnic. Clara shared that she was glad that the prince liked it. The garden in the castle is nice enough, but choosing to go into the forest sometimes is great too. The prince remarked that everything around it was so green, very beautiful, and added that the girl had chosen a wonderful place. Bastion darted in their direction and wondered if they were going to eat. Everyone seemed to want to. Daniel thanked His Majesty, to which the king replied that he had said not to thank him. Clara looked at them and wondered if it seemed like it, or if the atmosphere between the prince and the king had become friendlier. As they ate, the princess thought about how delicious it was and noted that on a full stomach everyone vaporizes. Clara shared with the boys that it tasted even better in the fresh air. The prince supported her, sharing that he hadn't eaten like this in a long time. Bastion decided to clarify if the prince wanted to say that the food in Verona hadn't been great before. Daniel replied that it was just that today it was especially delicious. Clara wondered if they had decided to start an argument again. It was dangerous. The princess looked pleadingly at her brother. Bastion remembered that he had almost forgotten why he had come to the picnic in the first place and suggested that they go for a walk. He asked Clara to see that he wasn't going to argue and asked his sister if she was satisfied. Clara smilingly replied that yes, she was pleased. Bastion told them to go. Clara was delighted, noting that the forest was so beautiful, so green and very fresh. She asked her brother if he agreed, to which he said of course. The girl didn't understand what was wrong with his face. She suggested that he try to smile, since they were already here anyway. Bastion said he didn't need to, and turned to the prince and said they needed to talk. Clara didn't understand, but her brother asked her to walk around a bit and wait for them. It wouldn't take long. Clara didn't understand what they were going to talk about, but she agreed. The king only asked her not to go too far away. Our girl told him not to worry. As she moved away from them, she wondered if it would be all right. Suddenly, Clara noticed a squirrel, and as she got closer to it, she wondered if the squirrel would run away, even if she got so close. Clara held out her hand to her, calling her not here. Squirrel sniffed her hand and began to rub it. Clara called her sweetie. Abruptly, something caught the squirrel's attention and she ran. But after a little bit of running away from the princess, the squirrel stopped. Clara wondered if she wanted the girl to follow her. The princess suggested that maybe she had a master, so she wasn't afraid of people, and decided that she would see where the squirrel would take her. Clara noticed that she was speeding up and shouted to her to wait, as the girl wasn't keeping up. At some point, Clara lost track of her and wondered where the squirrel had gone. The princess didn't understand where she was, because she hadn't run far away. The girl realized that she was lost and remembered her brother's words that she should not go far away. She mentally thought about the fact that she had said that everything would be all right, but why was she so stupid? Clara realized that she needed to find the path she had come on. As she walked through the forest, she noticed that it was much bigger than she thought, and it was getting dark soon. When she saw a strange light that was right between the trees, it seemed to be a way out, and the princess was glad that she could find the way. Clara headed confidently towards that light. She walked through it. It was as if a door had closed behind her. The girl didn't realize what it was now, but when she looked forward, she realized that this wasn't Verona. Even the clothes were of styles unfamiliar to her, and such buildings Clara was seeing for the first time. The girl thought she would walk back out, but she was in an unfamiliar place. This was not Verona at all. Clara didn't understand how there could be such different places on different sides of the same forest. She wondered if she was in another world. She realized that she had to go back now, If she went any further, she would be completely lost. Clara rushed back into the forest, but the passage was gone. The princess didn't understand where she was now. Walking through the forest, Clara wondered if she was back, if it was a mirage. She thought she was going deeper and deeper, and then she caught herself thinking that suddenly she wouldn't get out at all. Suddenly it started to rain. Then Clara heard someone calling her name, and she realized that she was back after all. She could hear them. Someone put their hands on her shoulders from behind, which made Clara terrified, and she fell forward face first. Turning around, she saw the prince, who stated that he didn't mean to scare the girl, and asked her if she was all right. The prince helped her up, and stated that she had disappeared so suddenly that they immediately rushed to look for her. Bastion ran towards them, calling for his sister. Suddenly, he ran up to the prince and insulted him by pushing him. Bastion was outraged. How dare the prince treat the princess like that? Clara stated that her brother had gotten it all wrong, and the prince helped her up. The girl asked Daniel if he was okay, since it was all because of her. The prince replied that he was fine. Bastion cursed and turned to Clara and hugged her sharply. He seriously asked her where she had been all this time, if she knew how worried he was about her. Clara apologized, adding that she had gotten lost in the woods. Clara thought of the poor maids and knights. They were so tired. They must have been looking for her all over the forest. Clara wasn't a child anymore, but she made everyone nervous. She reminded herself that they had come for a picnic, if only she hadn't run after the squirrel. Bastion wondered if she was sighing with such a guilty look, since he wasn't angry with her at all. He also asked her if she wanted to go on a picnic again next time. Clara replied that it was all her fault, because she wanted the king and the prince to get closer. Bastion put his hand on Clara's head and stated that they would come here again. Today just wasn't their day. Clara thanked him, noting that he always took such good care of her. Bastion became embarrassed and replied that not at all, nothing of the sort, and declared that he'd had enough of getting wet. Clara called the prince quickly so that she wouldn't get sick. The prince smiled and agreed to hurry up. The next day came. The maid shared that when the king was looking for the princess, he told them he would burn the forest to the ground if Clara was not found. The girl noted that that was too much. The maid shared that that's how angry the king got. He then ordered everyone to spread out and look for the princess, and if anything happened to her. The maid added that the king was very scary even in normal times, but that day they thought he would kill them for sure. Clara noted that everyone had suffered so much because of her, and apologized. The girl summed up for herself that no more walks in the forest. She still didn't know what had happened to her in the forest, whether it was a vision or something else. Sarah asked Clara if she was okay, since she was soaking wet from the rain. The princess replied that she was fine and not to worry, but she decided to ask if anyone was sick. One of the maids honestly admitted that the prince had caught a cold. Clara immediately ran to his room. The prince asked her not to come closer or she would get infected. However, the girl still approached him, and he asked her to move away. Clara asked him how he was, or he would be sick on such warm days. He must have caught a cold because he was soaking wet in the rain. Clara poured him a glass of water and asked him to drink it, because then his coughs wouldn't be so dry and frequent. Daniel thanked her. The princess asked if the prince had seen a doctor, to which Daniel replied that he didn't need any treatment. He would recover quickly. Clara noted that even though he said so, she asked his permission to check. The girl put her palm to his forehead and shared that just as she thought, the prince had a high fever. She didn't understand how he was just going to put up with this. Clara asked him to wait a little while. She'd get the doctor in a flash. Daniel declared that he was fine, but Clara had already run away. The doctor noted that the prince had a high fever, but no cause for concern, just a common cold. Daniel should just rest and take a potion. The maid alerted the princess that they had brought tomorrow for the sick man, and the princess invited them in. Clara shared with the prince that she had asked for porridge to be prepared for him, as it was very nutritious. He should definitely eat before taking his medication. Daniel noted that he seemed to have caused the princess a lot of inconvenience, and was so embarrassed. Clara didn't understand the inconvenience, and added that she would stay with the prince until he ate everything. The prince didn't understand why and stated that he had no appetite at all, then asked if he could take his medicine. Clara stated that he needed to at least eat a little before taking them. Daniel ate 1 spoonful of porridge and stated that he couldn't. Clara relented and asked Emily, the maid, to bring the medicine. The princess herself sat down on the bed and stated that she would feed the prince. He just needed to open his mouth and chew. The prince was surprised at her words that she would feed him. Clara pointed out that it must be hard for him to even hold a spoon, so she would help. Clara handed him the first spoon and asked him to say the A sound long. The prince was embarrassed, but the princess asked him to be quicker or it would get cold. Daniel ate the first spoonful and declared that he felt like a little kid. Clara clarified that if he was shy, then let him chew faster. Daniel asked if the princess found it funny, to which Clara replied that no, she didn't think the prince would laugh. She realized in her mind that she would have to admit that Danielle was very nice. As she drank the medicine, Daniel noted that it tasted so bitter and asked if all the medicines in Verona were like that. Clara shared that good potions always tasted bitter, but they worked perfectly. Clara apologized to the prince, adding that she should have warned him right away, as he had caught a cold because he was looking for the princess in the rain. Daniel smiled and said that it wasn't the princess's fault. He'd enjoyed the picnic, so the girl shouldn't worry about it. Clara remarked that Daniel was so kind. She took him in her arms and declared that she would continue to look after the prince and he would get well very soon. And also, when next time he went out, the girl would be sure to give him some money with her. Only so that the king would not know, for it is so hard to live without money. Daniel noted that the girl seemed to know what poverty was. Clara replied that she didn't from personal experience. Daniel thanked her, adding that he hadn't often been so sick and had never been cared for by anyone like that. The prince stated that without the princess's involvement, he definitely wouldn't have been able to survive and settle in Verona. The princess was like a ray of light to him. The girl's heart began to beat faster. Daniel blushed and said that he thought he should sleep now. Clara didn't realize that her heart could beat so loudly. She seemed to be able to hear the prince's heart beating just as hard. Daniel asked the princess if she had seen His Majesty. Clara replied that no, not yet. As soon as she heard that the prince was sick, the first thing she did was go to check on him. The prince shared that he thought the girl should know that the king was very afraid for the girl that day, and she should go to him. Clara agreed, stating that she certainly would, and asked the prince to rest. Daniel thanked her, and after the girl left, he crawled under the covers with his head buried. Bastion shouted in his office, "How could this be possible? It was unthinkable that some squirrel would dare to do such a thing to royalty." Clara didn't understand why they were still discussing the squirrel. Bastion stated that he would not burn the forest, but it would be better to give the princess another land. Clara was surprised and added that she was fine. She shouldn't be. Bastion stated that it wasn't because of some squirrel. This forest was dangerous. He'd picked the wrong place. Clara reminded him that he had warned her not to move away, and she still did. It was just her mistake. Bastion declares that the girl had nothing to do with it. It was all the squirrel's fault. Clara doesn't think it is. The king asked the girl not to go there again. Clara asked him not to worry, because she really wouldn't go there anymore, and suggested that they talk about something else. Bastion agreed and asked if the prince had caught a cold, if he was so weak. He added that noblemen did not catch colds so easily. Clara asked if the king was all right, for he had been looking for her in the rain with the others. The king replied that, unlike the prince, he was not weak. Clara wondered why he was so confident, if he was in a good mood. However, he wondered if the girl was not taking wishful thinking for reality. Clara replied that it was wonderful and that she was happy for the king, and after a moment she said that she would go. Bastion asked Clara to wait, and he wanted to say something, but he said that they would talk later and allowed the girl to go. Clara said goodbye to him until we meet again. One of the maids informed the princess that there was trouble. The prince had a fever again. Clara was shocked, because yesterday he was examined by a doctor. Emily doesn't know why, but he has gotten worse. She will run for the doctor right away. Clara burst sharply into Daniel's room. He asked him if he was conscious, if he could open his eyes. The girl thought about the fact that she had only gone to meet Bastion. What had happened? Emily announced that the doctor was here. The doctor apologized to the princess, saying that apparently his student had mixed the medicine incorrectly. Clara clarified what he meant. Had they forgotten that the prince was a high-ranking guest of the royal family? She questioned, "Are medicines made for people of such class by mere apprentice healers?" Clara didn't understand. How dare they? They should apologize to the prince, not her. The doctor apologized once more, stating that it was an oversight on his part. Suddenly the prince turned to the princess. The doctor apologized to him, saying that he would make a new medicine for him right away. Daniel replied that everything was fine, but Clara was still indignant. The prince asked her not to worry, for he would soon get better. Emily brought a bidet with water and a towel, and wanted to wipe it herself, but Clara said she would do it herself. The princess turned to the prince and asked him to get well soon. When Daniel opened his eyes, he saw the princess sleeping on the edge of his bed. The prince turned to her and added that she should not continue to sleep here. She was uncomfortable. She had better go to her chambers. However, the girl continued to sleep. An inch of her hair fell right on her face, and the prince decided to fix it, whereupon his hand froze at the girl's face as she woke up. Blushing, Clara asked the prince if he was awake. The prince also blushed and replied that, yes, it was uncomfortable. Clara stood up abruptly and apologized, noting that she must have accidentally fallen asleep. Daniel replied that it was fine. Suddenly, Bastion appeared in the room and asked them what they were doing here. He added that he had gone to look for Clara and what he saw. The prince started to get out of bed, stating that he was almost well and thanking him for his concern. Bastion replied that he didn't care about the prince's health at all. The king asked the girl what they were talking about and why the girl helped the prince herself and not the maids. Clara shared that she made him sick and she thought she should do something for him. Bastion said it wasn't her job, she was a princess, she wasn't supposed to do that. Clara asked him not to get angry and to tell her why he was here, because it was unlikely that he would come for nothing. Bastion stated to Clara that he wanted to finish their conversation and suggested that she go outside and talk. The girl clarified that the prince should not know, because he is also an aristocrat, and she thinks that everything will be fine. The king replied that it was a matter of the kingdom of Verona, so the prince had something to do with it. Clara clarified if it was a matter of royal importance. Bastion stated that yes, he wants to talk about his fiancée. The prince and princess were shocked by his words. Daniel clarified to His Majesty whether he was engaged. Clara didn't understand why he had made that decision so soon after his daughter Martina's departure. Bastion scolded. Vitu was only going to discuss this with Clara. Just since this morning, the officials have been making such a fuss over the problems with this engagement. One official said that he didn't know if he could talk about it, to which the king replied that he shouldn't talk if he couldn't. However, the official went on to say that he is concerned that the Queen's seat remains vacant. He clarified if the officials would like him to get married soon. He asked them to speak up because he had nothing to say. The same official continued that His Majesty was old enough, so what would he say about the engagement? The other officials here also supported. Bastion thought about leaning toward marriage again. One day he would have to do it as king, but he didn't see if it was necessary now. The king shared with the princess and the prince that this was something he wanted to ask. She asked her sister if she thought he should really get engaged. The girl didn't understand why she had, to which Bastion replied that he didn't know. He just wanted to ask if it was really time for him to do it, because he had started listening to this kind of talk a long time ago, but didn't pay attention to it. However, now he thought he needed to seriously think about it. Clara replied that he need not ask her about it then, for the engagement depended only on the will of his self. Clara glanced over at the prince and realized that if she didn't take it seriously, there would be trouble. There was a split in Verona, in the second half of the affair, because Bastion had no heir. If he dies without an heir, the nobility of Verona will be divided into 3. Even if it's not because of Daniel, there should still be someone beside Bastion. The king asked the girl why she was silent. The girl said abruptly that she thought the engagement was a great idea. Her brother asked her if she really thought he should get engaged. Daniel apologized for interrupting the two of them, but he wondered who his fiancée was. Clara asked if he had someone in his heart, to which Bastion replied that he had no one, Clara thought it was important, but he'd forgotten the most important thing. She wondered if there was anyone who wanted to get engaged to him. She would have to deal with that character first, because judging by the character, Martina would be a good match for him. Bastion asked his sister what was wrong with her face. Anyway, he realized what they meant, so he goes back. He remembered something, and said that the two of them should stay away from each other, and slammed the door behind him. The maids asked the princess if she thought she was all right. Clara herself recalled moments with the prince, but she turned her head sharply, declaring that she would not think about it. She wondered who her brother should marry. For first of all, this girl should have royal qualities in her, and also, first of all, she should accept Bastion's personality. Well, whatever it was, she should be a young girl. The maids surrounded Clara and clarified about His Majesty's bride. Clara wondered at them. That's funny, isn't it? She realized that she seriously couldn't see a worthy candidate. Clara thought about who she should find. Sarah asked the princess why she was suddenly looking for a bride. Clara replied that the thing was that even her brother couldn't be alone forever, and she would recommend someone to him if a good person came along. Sarah noted that the princess thought so much of her brother, and they did get along great. However, the princess sadly remarked that it didn't help her too much. However, the maid Sarah had an idea and decided to ask the princess for her opinion. A few days later, in Count Montes's mansion, Cecilia called out loudly to her father. The Count asked his daughter anxiously what was the matter, for she was so out of breath. He wondered if it was a letter from the palace this time. Cecilia confirmed his words, stating that she had received a formal invitation as a potential bride for His Highness. Father did not understand what she meant. Cecilia replied that she would read it again. The letter says that the royal palace is looking for a bride for His Highness, the Countess of Montes. Please take note of this and prepare yourself. The Count didn't understand how it happened. His Majesty had invited a bride. The Count noted, although His Majesty had no one yet, brides are often sent into exile to get rid of rivals, but his daughter had already been invited. He urged her to decline, for becoming his bride is absurd. However, the girl asked from her father to look there. It said above that it was impossible to abstain, and she must go as she could not refuse. The Count said it was all his fault. Why did he become a count at all? He would have been better off being a simple brewer. Cecilia asked her father not to worry so much, for there were always numbers of applicants to choose from. Earl clarified what it means to select. Cecilia shared that there is a preliminary selection and a final selection. Bastion said that he will only marry the finalist, so if you drop out early, it will be okay. The girl will therefore be proud to be among the former contenders. Cecilia was serious, and her father encouraged her not to get discouraged. Bastion at the palace remarked that it was a great idea. He thought about it and immediately sent an official invitation to all the royal families. He also praised Clara for her ability to give good ideas. The girl thanked him and added that if she could, she would like to organize a fair selection. Bastion agreed, indeed. If one chose only on the basis of status, it would be difficult to find a worthy candidate. And he still didn't have someone he liked, but that would be nice. He put his hand on his sister's shoulder and said he trusted her gaze. The girl wondered if he wouldn't oversee the selection himself, to which the king replied that she would have to go instead. If whoever she selects from can stand up to her, that's fine. Clara said that she would try to find him a suitable match. A great many girls had gathered, and when Cecilia saw them, she wondered if it was worth comparing. But she immediately set herself up that she was here to be eliminated, so she must not lose heart. No matter who she met over the selection, she need not be upset. The guard announced that Princess Clara was the jury president and told the others to be ready. The girl was greeted by the princess. Clara stated that neither sincerely welcomed everyone who had come to them from afar. The girl noted that she had seen some of them during the tea party, but there were some she had not yet met. However, the princess wondered if she had not come, but she had seen her. Clara greeted Mistress Cecilia. The other candidates remarked that Mistress Cecilia is close to the princess. The guard asked the young ladies to be quiet, please, and suggested that we begin the selection process. Each of the girls began to start introducing themselves in turn. One of them was Melia Wilt from Wilter County, who had a passion for embroidery. Clara made notes to herself and mentally noted that all the girls were gorgeous, so she didn't know who to choose. First, she decided to look at impression and character rather than appearance and status. You can learn all about personality from an interview, but can you base it on that? The next candidate was Cecilia, who introduced herself as being from Montes County. Meanwhile, her father was having a hard time thinking about his daughter and whether she was doing well. He wondered if she had failed to qualify, and that's why she was gone for so long. And so he waited. Cecilia turned to him. He ran to his daughter, asking her why it was taking so long, if she had made many mistakes, stammering, stuttering, studying while walking. Cecilia confirmed his words. The other candidates were shocked that she was breathing heavily and stuttering for some reason. Cecilia shared with her father about continuing to stutter. She kept watching their reactions, and the princess watching her looked embarrassed. The countess was a little worried because she was smiling at her, but she had so many mistakes, so it would be fine. The girl asked her father not to worry. You'll definitely get out in selections. Cecilia was asked if there were any virtues she wanted to share with them. The girl stammered and replied that she was good at singing lullabies. Clara noted that this was a distinct advantage and wrote on a slip of paper that Cecilia Montes was passing. The prince was reading a book at the table when suddenly Clara and her maid appeared in the room. The princess asked him if he was all right. The prince asked the princess what she was doing here. The girl replied that a new tea had been brought and she had come to drink it with the prince. Daniel was surprised. Clara shared that she liked its flavour so much that it would be a pity to drink it alone. Mentally, the girl noted that it was actually an excuse to see Daniel, but she keeps thinking about that hand kiss and other moments. Princess realises that she can't deal with it like she used to, but eating runs that she can't. The prince tastes the tea and notes that it's really good. The maid shared that the princess had chosen the best tea from the ones they had brought. Clara noted that the prince had stacked all the books on the shelf within a few days, since there were so many books. The prince shared that Miss Emily took care of that, as she brought him everything he needed every day, so he wasn't bored. Clara was a little perturbed why Emily hadn't told her, because she could have helped too. The princess said that if he needed anything, he should please let him tell her, as she wanted to help too. The prince replied that that was enough. After all, he is a hostage to some extent, so he thinks he is living too luxuriously as it is. Clara stated that he was a very important guest. Daniel thanked her and added that he was still happy that the girl had come all this way for him, and that tea would now be her favourite. He shared that he had noticed that the palace was quite noisy today, and asked if it was related to the search for a bride for His Majesty. Clara confirmed his words. They say that the candidate passed the first stages today. She also shared that she was on the jury, and can say that there were quite a few girls, and the selection took longer than expected. The maid said that she brought the princess a chair and asked her to please sit down. Daniel asked if he had any favourites. Clara replied that there was one young girl who had shown her interest, but she wasn't sure she could stand up to her brother. The prince pointed out that in the end, this engagement was up to her. It's also quite hard for him to imagine that someone other than a princess could be His Majesty Bastion's favourite. Clara sadly stated that the prince would also be the favourite one day. The prince replied that he really wanted it to go well. Unexpectedly, she asked him if he remembered the night of the Cellini in the Empire. Danielle replied that it had already passed. Clara abruptly jumped up from her seat, for it is a big celebration in Nirhaya Daniel from the original. The mystery escaped that day to enjoy the festivities, and there the first meeting with the girl Adriana took place. Clara reflected that if the night of the Cellini had already passed, it was now pair to the original, the time of Bastion's death. The original story said that Emperor Nerja would awaken in September, but it's not known when exactly the prince escapes. Therefore, the girl could assume that Verona's story would end around September. The maid asked the princess what was wrong with her. Clara realized that the original had already changed. She'd overstepped because she hadn't helped Daniel escape. The prince noted that the girl's mood seemed to have improved. Unexpectedly, the girl asked him if he would like to go with her to the selection. A few days later in Verona Palace, people were looking at the girl, not understanding what she was doing in front of the palace, if she was a criminal. It was Cecilia. She didn't understand why it had happened. After all, there were plenty of girls better than her. She remembered Clara's smile and wondered if perhaps she had been together spoiling the cake at the tea party. The guards lifted Cecilia off the floor, telling her she shouldn't do it. The girl decided that this time she should look at the jury and not move. What if she was chosen? People didn't understand what kind of girl she is. She looks so strange and has no idea who she is. Cecilia pointed out that today she purposely made her makeup darker and wore clothes that are not at all typical for her, then gave up with the question, "Isn't that not enough?" The girl mentally begged His Majesty not to choose her. Seeing the prince, Bastion asked why he had come here. Clara replied that she had brought him here to introduce him to the culture of Verona. Daniel greeted His Majesty. Bastion asked if this was a playground for them to just come here, to which his sister replied that she didn't mean that. The king stated that if they were looking for an excuse, they could have come up with something better, or what a culture in general. Clara shared that during the conversation, she had seen a lot of pretty young girls. Bastion replied that he couldn't live just looking at their faces. He wasn't interested. And anyway, he wasn't ready yet, so don't wait over there in the corner. The prince noted that the princess had turned pale and did not look well. The girl replied that it is always like that with her brother. She is fine. Bastion looked at them scolded, because they are too close to each other. The next moment already a lot of yes greeted His Majesty. Bastion replied that he welcomed them all and thanked them for coming such a long way. He suggested that they enjoy this moment before the final selection began. Cecilia was glad she was late, as she was unlikely to be noticed in the crowd, and now she had to get out of there carefully. Looking at the ladies, the king thought it would go on forever, but then his gaze locked on someone. He went to the girls and started to ask them to step back. Cecilia was enjoying the cake at that moment, thinking that although she was very worried about the situation, the cake was so delicious. Suddenly, the king appeared behind her and addressed the girl. He remembered what it had been like then, with the cake. Cecilia had been shocked. As he had found out, she had looked very different then. Bastion noted, did the Countess of Montes really participate in this selection? He added that the other girls greeted him as soon as they arrived, so why was she standing in that corner? Cecilia didn't know what to do. She was so scared, but she couldn't say anything. Daniel, inform the princess that something seems to have happened. Clara didn't understand what was wrong. Bastion stated that really, her apologies no longer mattered. He said goodbye to Cecilia until we meet again soon. The other ladies were shocked. How did His Majesty recognize the Countess Montes? Did something really happen between the two of them? One of the ladies stated that she had seen them at a tea party, and at the time she seemed to hate His Majesty. Everyone remarked that the Countess Monte was in big trouble. Cecilia thought about how everything was lost. She was supposed to be quiet after all. The girl realized that if she did nothing, she could really die at the hands of His Majesty. The girls were asked to please prepare for the final test. The committee members appeared. The prince asked the princess if she wasn't the one who would be judging them today. Clara confirmed this, sharing that the servants would be the judges today. The first stage was judged by her, and the second stage by some of the servants. That's fine. They would be more professional about it than she who had just become Clara. The attendants noted the girl's external features: red lips, straight teeth, or pale lips. To some, they gave the perfect type. Perfect. Clara was dumbfounded as to what kind of examination this was. Daniel noted that it was more interesting than he thought. Daniel picked up on the fact that the committee seemed to put a lot of effort into creating a certain standard of beauty. Bastion asked the employees if something was wrong, why they were taking so long. They replied that they were almost finished. The guard announced that there would now be a sun energy test, and the apprentice knights were asked to step forward. Danielle asked the princess what sun energy meant, to which the girl replied that she didn't know either. Clara didn't understand why they had called the knights here. She was starting to get nervous. The knights were ordered to strike a pose. Suddenly, the knights bent over, and Bastion didn't realize at all what it was. The king indignantly asked what they were going to do now. The attendant stated that they were going to test the young lady's punching power. Bastion did not understand what the force of the blow had to do with the energy of the sun. The attendant replied that this method had been used since ancient times. A girl with good hitting power has good sun energy. Clara was horrified, for such methods were not used even in the Joseon dynasty. Danielle suggested that maybe the knights had just made a mistake. Clara clarified whether she really thought so. The girl didn't see the point of kicking them. Since Clara has no choice, she'll just have to leave it up to the girls. No matter how honourable they are, they need to stay honest. The attendant reminded the knights to stay in the proper posture. The girls felt sorry for these knights. Perhaps this is such torture. However, some of the girls encouraged each other to kick harder, because that way they would feel relief. Daniel noted that the screams were getting louder. Clara shared that she didn't think it would get so serious. She wondered if girls relieved stress in a similar way. The princess also remarked that Bastion seems interested. However, the ladies noted that His Majesty seems annoyed, and the pageant seems spoiled. Cecilia stood aghast, not knowing what to do, for it was her turn. The attendant announced that the next Countess Montes was waiting for her. The girl noted that everyone was trying so hard, and she thought she should do about the same. She looked over to see that the knight was crying. It looked like it hurt a lot. She felt sorry for them, but still, she should too. However, after swinging her foot, Cecilia's shoe flew off and flew straight at His Majesty. He caught her shoe with his hand and asked whose shoe it was. Does this person really want to die? Bastion ordered her to come out now. Everyone looked at Cecilia. The girl was terrified, thinking that she would definitely be killed today. The guards grabbed Cecilia. The princess clung to Daniel, who reassured her that everything was all right. However, Clara recoiled, asking the prince why he had grabbed her too harshly. Daniel noted that maybe he was only protecting her. Clara was glad, because she had already thought that he had decided to hug her. The girl told him out loud that he shouldn't do that. She was very embarrassed by it, to which the prince replied that he was embarrassed too. However, what bothered him the most was this girl. After all, she got her shoe right into His Majesty. Bastion angrily asked if the girl hadn't heard him tell her to get out. The other ladies pointed out that after all it was Countess Montes, and didn't she do it on purpose? They didn't think she would get away with it this time. Cecilia's eyes came into view. She mentally begged her daddy and mummy for forgiveness. The Countess realised that she couldn't even say hello to him now. Bastion looked at the crying Cecilia and asked her if that shoe was hers. Who was she to allow herself that? Cecilia couldn't answer. Bastion asked who came up with this challenge and called the judges. One of the judges apologised to His Majesty, saying that he had made it up. Bastion said that the trials had to be thought out, if that was what they wanted. Didn't they persuade him to at least try the whole thing? One of the judges stated that it didn't make sense after all. She was chosen like the others by a careful selection process. Bastion clarified whether they could revive something like that after their careful selection, then threw a shoe in the face of one of the judges. The one stated that His Majesty was right, but that was the traditional custom after all. The king ordered the guards to take the judge away. The clerk apologised to His Majesty, saying he was sorry. Bastion wondered if he should still marry after all this. He wondered if he would be able to choose a worthy queen if something like this happened. But now, he saw no need to. Clara ran up to her brother and asked him what he meant, for he had to get married and the selection had just begun. The girl pointed out that so many beautiful girls had arrived, it would be a great disrespect to drop everything halfway through. Besides, they needed to see every one of them. If Bastion doesn't have an heir, it will destroy the country. Bastion cast a glance in his sister's direction and asked her if she wanted to say what she wanted with this engagement. The princess apologised. He summarised that her concern was not for him, but for the country. Daniel appeared next to Clara and stated that he agreed with the princess's words. These girls have all been through many trials, so they should see this through. He should keep his reputation after all. Bastion wondered mentally if the prisoners were now giving beautiful sermons. The king turned his back on the boys and stated that it was not going to happen. He stated to deal with them all. They all wanted to get him married as soon as possible. He didn't understand what the hell was the point of this random engagement. That's when his gaze fell on Cecilia. Walking past her, he motioned for someone else to be found for him. Clara realised that this was an even bigger problem. What should she do with these girls? Daniel turned to the princess and asked her permission to put this girl's shoe on, for she must be uncomfortable walking around without it. Cecilia squatted down and covered her face with her hands and declared that it was all her fault. Clara approached her and asked her to take her shoe. Cecilia began to rise, saying that she was sorry, for she really deserved to die. The princess replied that she shouldn't blame herself too much. The way things had turned out with the selection was not her fault. Besides, she had survived twice already, and if another person had been in her place, he would have been executed long ago. Cecilia began to tremble and asked the princess what it all meant. Clara helped her up and said that next time they would have tea. Cecilia apologized to the princess, noting that she was truly sorry. She asked her to forgive her, please. Clara didn't understand what was wrong with her. Fashionable to think that the princess was Bastion. Left alone, Bastion cursed, for he didn't understand why they were all so fixated on this engagement. And the prince, the king doesn't like him either. And he even showed up for the bride selection unafraid to laugh and flirt with Clara. Bastion was mad as hell, remembering the moment of the incident. He wondered if the prince hadn't hugged Clara on purpose. He knows perfectly well he's just a hostage after all, it's even funny. Bastion wondered how long they had been friends like this, and he must be the only one who cared. The next day at Aguila Palace, a clerk announced that he would read His Majesty's wishes for the engagement. Since His Majesty couldn't find a candidate worthy of the Queen, the ceremony of pre-selection of the Queen would be cancelled. However, the Queen's seat could not be left empty, so His Majesty decided that he would only be married to Verona for today. Clara was shocked that there would be no engagement. The maids confirmed her words, adding that just yesterday it had been announced at a meeting. Clara noted that yesterday's event had been ruined too, but that. Clara said that was wrong, and that she would probably have to talk to her brother herself. She asked the maids if her brother was still with the ministers. The maids ran after her, noting that His Majesty's heart must be troubled. All the ministers asked His Majesty to think again. He was asked to apologise, but considering his age, he was already a bit late with this. Bastion replied that it was too noisy, and he had nothing more to say. From now on, anyone against the king's will would be considered a traitor, so he told them not to dwell on it. Clara appeared in front of Bastion, shouting for him to wait. The king asked his sister if she could get out of the way. The girl stated that he couldn't solve his engagement problems like this. Even if he doesn't get married now, one day he will still do it. However, his words today mean that he will never marry at all. The ministers supported the princess and added that no matter how it was, he should not do that. The princess asked the king to look at them. So many people are concerned about all this. She asked him why doesn't he just set a new date for the selection. The king told them to stop, no matter what they said, no matter how valuable it all was. That was the end of it. He was not getting married. Everyone continued to address His Majesty, however he did leave. Clara stated that she would speak to him again. The girl asked the ministers not to worry too much, for she was sure that everything would be all right. The ministers bowed to the princess and thanked her. One of the ministers noted that the girl had worked so hard with the young girls at the selection and had even had a conversation with them herself. They are surprised at how much she is worried about it. Clara remarked that it was embarrassing and they should not say that. The ministers apologized to her for behaving inappropriately with her earlier. They are sure that only a princess can change His Majesty's mind. The ministers added that they will support the princess from now on. Clara wondered what the mood was. Maybe she was being recognized. She wasn't trying to please them this time, but she felt so good that they thanked her. And after all, she hadn't even gotten a greeting from them before. Suddenly, someone asked her why she was smiling. It was Bastion. The girl asked him if he was waiting for her. He replied that he was too embarrassed, so he had to leave first. Clara didn't understand what he was embarrassed about, to which the king reminded her that he had told her that he was going to marry Verona. Clara agreed and pointed out that no one would go against him. And the girl added that he wouldn't say anything else either, because what did it matter if he was going to be stubborn anyway? Instead, she would rather wait for Bastion to meet his true love, only let him tell her when that would happen. Bastion didn't understand what had happened to his sister. The girl replied that she was just sure that one day there would be a good man next to her brother. Bastion noticed that she spoke as if she already had someone in mind. Clara was surprised, but replied that no, she didn't know anyone. Bastion asked his sister why she was so surprised. He added that she too would get married someday. However, the king would not accept anyone who could not defeat him. Clara exhaled, noting who would defeat the king. Bastion said that the girl would never marry then, for he could leave her with someone who couldn't even do that. Clara clarified if that meant she would be single for the rest of her life. Bastion clarified that he was the only one left, but Clara replied that it was all right, because she wasn't going to marry. The king asked if his sister was serious, if she didn't have someone she liked. There was silence between the boys, and suddenly Bastion asked about Prince Daniel. Bastion noted that she looked pleased. Clara dejectedly turned to her brother, saying that she really has no feelings for the prince, so please, she asked to stop asking her about it. And she doesn't understand why this conversation about his fiancé has turned into a conversation about her marriage at all. She clarified if she could start it again. Bastion stated that he was ending the conversation then. Clara wondered why he just said all that. Did he really just want to know her thoughts on marriage? The girl realized that up until now, she had only lived to be recognized, to envision the future, but it was summer now. In the original story, Emperor Nerja wakes up in September. When he wakes up, he will of course call Prince Daniel to him. If he returns to the empire, then the empire will return to its former glory. She, Bastion and Daniel are also the main characters. There are not many days left to finish everything without any problems. And then they would all meet a happy ending. Daniel's brother smashed a glass of water against the wall. The man standing next to him stated that in addition, he was being bothered by the nobles on the second prince's side. Daniel's Bart yelled how he would know if Daniel was alive or dead. He didn't want to see him, so he sent him to the outskirts, and that Dirk somehow ended up in Verona. Anyone who's seen him knows Daniel is the crown prince. His brother is at a loss. These old men only want a second prince. How tired he is of doing everything for His Majesty. His interlocutor wondered if it would be better for His Majesty to strengthen his position now. Daniel's brother clarified what he meant. The interlocutor replied that they wanted to know whether the second prince was alive or dead. The second prince need not necessarily be alive. Daniel's brother agreed. He thought it would be good to give the nobles the answer they needed. As Daniel was reading a book in the library, someone disturbed him and pointed out that it was so late and he was still in the library. It turned out to be the princess. The prince asked her if something had happened at this hour. Clara answered that she had not slept. She thought to read something. In fact, however, the girl was restless at heart. She was glad that Verona's role in the novel was almost over. On the one hand, it was good, but on the other hand, she was somehow uneasy. It was very different from the novel she was familiar with. So to get rid of those intrusive thoughts, she went out to read. She shared that since there is a convoy standing at the entrance, she thought the prince must be here. The prince shared that His Majesty was worried about him, so he ordered the guards to be beefed up. The prince seems a little exaggerated, but Daniel is grateful. Clara mentally replied to the prince that it wasn't because he was worried, but just afraid that the prince would run away. The prince shared that it was Basil's newly released book, and he thought the princess would like it, so he put it aside. The girl thanked him, for she had been waiting for the new book to come out. She asked him if he had already read it. Daniel replied that he hadn't. He was waiting for the girl to read it first. Clara thanked him for his concern. She would definitely read it. The prince noted that he couldn't do anything for her, and it depressed him. He was glad that he could help her, even in such a small thing. He noted that the girl must be very busy preparing for His Majesty's wedding, and he wondered if she had sorted everything out. Clara replied that she didn't know, for she didn't think they were finished yet, but at least she had time to read. The prince noted that it would be better if she read during the day. The time being late, Daniel offered to walk Clara out. The girl thanked him. Just then, the boys heard shouting outside the library door. The girl didn't realize what the noise was. If something had happened. Daniel asked the princess to hide behind him. The door to the library opened, and robbers with swords entered. They killed all the guards in front of the library. Danielle asked them who they were. One of the brigands lunged at them, yelling about killing the boys. Daniel confidently dodged and snatched the sword from the attacking bandit. Danielle shouted to the princess to run, faster. Clara was terrified. The prince told her to run faster and call for help. Clara rushed away, but in the doorway she saw the corpses of the guards and thought they were all dead. Another brigand appeared next to her. He flew sharply towards the princess, who thought he was going to die. However, the prince pulled her towards him and put out his sword to repel the brigand's attack. Daniel shouted to the princess to run down that hallway. Clara started yelling about assassins being here and for someone to help them. That's when more guards appeared. They blocked the girl, and orders came in to help the prince and surround the intruders. Clara closed her eyes and ears. Then a familiar voice began to reach her. It was Daniel. He called out to the girl and informed her that it was over. Daniel asked her if she was okay. Here the princess abruptly started to fall, but the prince caught her. The girl replied that she was fine, just a little scared. Clara asked the prince if he himself was okay, to which the prince replied that yes, he was fine. Clara did not understand who these people were or where they came from. The princess pointed out that if the prince wasn't here, there could be tragedy. Daniel asked her not to exaggerate. She could calm down already. That's when Bastion appeared, asking what was wrong. The princess asked her brother what he was doing here at a time like this. Bastion noticed the bodies of the dead brigands and angrily asked if there had been an assassination attempt in the palace. The king grabbed the prince by the collar and said it was all because of him. The princess almost died because of him. Clara got in between them, saying that no, the prince saved her. The king didn't understand what she meant, after all. It was all because of him. Bastion urged her to think about why they came to the princess, not even to him, who would dare touch her in the first place. He summarized that it was clear to everyone that the assassins had been sent to kill Prince Daniel, for who would dare look down on Verona? Bastion declared that this was war. He would kill his brother and wipe Nerja into powder. Clara asked her brother to calm down, for there was no proof that Nerja was involved. She asked him not to get angry, to calm down. Clara also reminded him that it was the middle of the night, and they would figure it all out tomorrow morning. Bastion stated that if he didn't do something now, it would be too late tomorrow. Daniel stated that then he would kill him right now. Bastion and Clara were dumbfounded by his words. Clara asked him why he was saying such a thing. Daniel noted that His Majesty was taking everything so personally. He hates him. Their country has decided to declare war on him. Daniel added that the king now knew that if he acted rashly in the future, it would be more difficult to solve the problem. Bastion told Daniel to shut up. Clara asked her brother if he thought, well, they could work things out tomorrow morning. Bastion said that if the girl thought it would end like this, she was wrong, but he agreed to see what would happen tomorrow. The king apprised Clara that she must rest a little and come to the meeting tomorrow morning, for he would tell at it what had happened here. The prince declared that he would go then, and as the princess must be very frightened, she should go and rest. Clara turned to the prince and thanked him for today. Without him she would have died long ago. The girl called him her saviour and that she would repay him. The prince replied that if the princess was safe, that was enough. He stated that it was then time for him to go. One of the guards was asked to tell what had happened last night. The man introduced himself as a guard for the Imperial Library. He was the head of the post and was patrolling the area. But as he hurried away, he heard a loud commotion in the room. Assassins and the prince were fighting. Some of the knights noted that it had been a long time since the engagement had been announced. This time the assassins. Bastion asked who these people were, if they'd checked them out. He wondered if it might have something to do with Bardo, if they might be from there. The knights asked the king if he was sure about that. Bastion didn't understand why they were so worried. They were in the process of preparing the hall. Clara wondered at her brother if he really thought anyone could have sent assassins. The girl noted that once he had calmed down, he would think wisely. The king replied that in his opinion, yes, who else could send assassins? The knights agreed that it was the work of an enemy, and Verona had many enemies. Not having to work too hard in the imperial palace meant they had excellent skills. So everyone must realize that it's all a setup. It's reasonable to assume that the assassins were sent by the great power, but the prince showed up at the end. Nerja must have sent the assassins. All the knights were in agreement that only Nerja could, and it was a declaration of war on Verona. One of the knights stated that they should show their strength. There was also a statement that Prince Daniel should be imprisoned immediately. Clara stated that enough was enough. Bastion asked the girl to sit down. However, Clara turned to her brother and stated that if he had something to say, let him speak. Bastion ordered the servants out, getting everyone out except Clara. Bastion noted that he had kicked everyone out as the girl had said, and stated that now they would talk. The girl noted that it didn't take long for war to break out. It was reckless to start a war now. Bastina stated that he is the enemy after all. If this is indeed Nair's work, he can't stand still. He stated that this person should not live in Verona. Clara stated that it was an act of non-reconciliation. Bastion replied that they attacked first. Clara stated that this was not enough evidence. The king noted that the girl still doesn't understand why he is doing this, so why is she angry? He genuinely doesn't understand why the girl stops him. Why she doesn't understand him, doesn't she understand? He remarks that the girl would be dead if she was there alone. Clara asked her brother to look at her, that she is alive and she can't die. For how can she leave her beloved brother? Bastion was embarrassed and declared how his sister was not ashamed. Clara replied to her dear brother that she would never leave him and asked him to calm down. Bastion replied that he was calm. He couldn't manage himself, and he was acting strange because of her. Clara stated that he was acting strange because she was a peace-loving princess herself. She said that a monarch who thinks only of war cannot be a soldier. Bastion didn't quite understand her, to which the girl reminded him that her brother was married to Verona. The king didn't understand what that had to do with war. Clara retorted by asking if it didn't matter. She asked him to tell her that she would not go to war. Bastion swore and pointed out that if the girl continued to insist, he would listen. However, next time, if something happened, he would not stand for it. Clara thought about when the crisis would be over, however, what would happen next. The girl stated to her brother that he shouldn't do that. Sarah asked Clara what she was talking about. The maid heard that the princess had met a kill and hadn't even been scared. Clara replied that it was scary, but clarified if it wasn't too much. Sarah noted that they were all worried about the princess, and she would have done the same if she were in His Highness's shoes. Clara noted that she could have her older brother assigned to her. Clara asked the guards to wait a second. She would speak to the prince and ask them to please wait for him outside. Sarah stated that His Highness had ordered guards to be assigned to the girl. Clara replied that she knew and she would be back soon. Just let them stay here. Clara asked the guard if he would tell the prince that she was here, to which the guard replied that it would be done. The princess asked not to worry, for she would be quick. The prince cheerfully greeted the princess. Clara asked the prince if he was locked in his room, to which he replied that he was. He had come in the morning to clean up. Clara shared that it was such a relief to her. She thought her baby brother had locked the prince up for yesterday. Daniel replied that he didn't think so, for Your Highness couldn't be such a limited man. Clara wondered why he'd been called a tyrant. The prince shared with the princess that he was thinking about it, and the assassins seemed to have really been sent from the imperial side, just like His Highness said. Clara is sure that everyone thinks so, as there is no one in Verona who would go against her brother. Daniel stated that he was sorry. Clara replied that the prince has nothing to apologize for, since he is also a victim. Daniel was sure that they had come for him. He said repeatedly that he wasn't interested. He had been like that since he was young, and was always unhappy that he couldn't kill him. In his memory, his brother had only been friendly with him once. He was about to commit political assassination by letting his guard down and putting poison in his drink. Somehow he'd taken Daniel to a deserted place. His brother called him such an idiot, not a word of kinship. Does he still trust him? His brother then said that was why he shouldn't have done it, and called him a puppy, and said goodbye. The bandits swung swords at Daniel. The prince stated that it was his fault that the princess was in danger. However, Clara believes it was because he kidnapped the prince. However, the prince will not surely be able to return to Nerja. His Highness will wake up. She is sure he will be the first to find the prince. Daniel remarked, always saying good things, and because of that, he feels a surge of energy. Clara noted the relief. The girl declared that from then on she would take charge until the day she returned safely to her homeland. She suggested that the prince swear on his little fingers. The prince remarked that it was a swearing rite. They clutched their little fingers together, and it stated that he trusted the princess. Daniel's brother was notified that the attempt had failed. Brother was outraged. The country had sent the best of the best, but they hadn't even hit that puppy. His clerk apologized and added that in addition, the King of Verona said today that there was a man in the palace who was specifically trying to make an assassination attempt. The second prince was supposed to be the Princess of Verona, and she almost followed instructions. Daniel's brother clarified if there was anyone who suspected Nerhu. The attendant replied that there had been no official meeting, but it was said that the princesses had spoken against the king's opinion. Daniel's brother noted that if you think about it, all of the king's brothers are dead, and there is only one left. Something was bothering him. He added that next time they would have to be more secretive, and he asked to gather details about the princess. The attendant stated that he would do as he pleased. Expectantly, someone knocked on His Highness's office, informing him that he had a message for him. His Highness noted that he had said not to let anyone in. The servant apologized and said that he would issue a warning. Another servant appeared in the doorway and told His Highness that there was a big trouble. Meteorites were falling one after another on the east coast. Brother Daniele was shocked that suddenly meteorites were falling, and he asked who did it. Here he realized that if it was the east, it meant Veron attacked. Bastion stated that the arrogant boys from Nurk should be shot down. However, attack and war would be different. The king stated to the Prince of Nerja that he will allow him to do such devious things again. His Highnesses of Nerja makes no sense, for the King of Verona's nickname is Tyrant, and he did not know that Bastion would be so cruel. His Highness Nerja was asked what they would do, for if war breaks out when His Majesty is unconscious, no matter what the enemy is, it will be difficult. King Verona's troops always win under his leadership. At present, there is no one in Nerja who can handle him. If there was at least a second prince. Daniel's brother angrily pointed out that didn't he know that the second foolish prince had been taken to Verona, whereupon he added that he was not afraid of war and would do so. The attendant asked His Highness to calm down, for it was not yet time to bring the army forward.